This is the story of three brothers who set out for some innocent fun on a chilly, wintry day in late December 1945. School had already let out for the holidays and Christmas was just a few days away. They'd been to regular church services and they'd eaten their Sunday dinner. Expecting only a short afternoon adventure, the boys soon found that one afternoon would not be enough. A discovery of an object in the woods made the difference. It was an innocent-looking wooden packing crate. But unbeknownst to them, the crate's contents had a special history all its own. At first, they couldn't believe what they saw inside the crate. Their initial reaction changed as they slowly began to understand what they saw and how important it was to the whole world as they knew it. Now, everybody should be aware that as far as the evidence and events in this story are concerned, whether they are real or imagined, fact or fiction, just depends on who you talk to. Now, there's a little history that's going to be required before our story begins. In the early morning hours of Sunday, December 14th of 1941, the little town of Wilton, Arkansas, was blasted awake by a horrendous, thunder-crashing, bone-rattling noise. Two freight trains traveling at a very high rate of speed met on the same track just north of town. There was people, iron, steel, freight scattered all about the train's right-of-way. Some of the freight found its way into a nearby creek and floated downstream before finding a resting place. Reclamation teams were dispatched to find and recover as much as possible. Some looked for bodies while others looked for freight. Unfortunately, the freight fared better than the people on that date near Christmas 1941. For the next 4 war-torn years, Christmas would be difficult to keep. Now let's return to 1945. "Hey, let's go down to the creek before it gets too dark," said 14-year-old Jay. Wayne and Wesley, ages 8 and 10, followed their older brother's lead with an exchanged nonverbal nod. The race was on. The creek had everything a boy in 1945 Wilton could possibly want. With just a smidge of imagination, it could be a stage for the reenactment of all that was or might someday be in history. Of course, the usual stuff was there too. Swimming, fishing in the creek were the big favorites of the Poole brothers and their friends. They all knew well the potential for real and imagined adventures along the banks of that little stream known as Lick Creek. Jay got to the finish line first, in part because he had started running first and thereby had established control of this impromptu contest. It didn't hurt that he knew where he was headed, or that unlike his opponents, he knew where the finish line was. And of course, his legs were longer. This time he chose to run down the right-of-way alongside of the railroad track until he reached a likely cutover spot to the creek. He stopped running, which basically signaled the end of the race. He waited for Wayne and Wes to catch up. When they got there, they followed Jay's lead and armed themselves with a few appropriately sized rocks from the railroad bed. Each rock needed to have enough mass to take out a bird or a squirrel and still be small enough to fit snugly into the holding pouch attached by the way of rubber inner tube strips inside the Y-shaped bean flip stock. No self-respecting bean flip artist would ever tempt to fate by using too big of a rock. The embarrassment of having a misfire would be too much to bear. A shooter could only imagine what ridicule he'd face if he missed the target altogether because his misplaced support thumb had absorbed all the fury of the forward-flung missile. Having taken on sufficient ammo, the boys leaded themselves out, headed out toward the banks of the mighty Lick Creek. Wayne, being the youngest and a bit of a lightweight, might have taken on too much ammo as he was finding it pretty difficult to keep his pants up under the control that he struggled to keep up with the boys. I mentioned earlier that the weapons and ammo used by the three brothers were geared to a bloodthirsty bird or a green acorn-crazed squirrel that they might expect to come across occasionally as they made their way into the wilderness. What they had not counted on was coming up on a blue racer snake. This time of year they are supposed to be hibernating, but that fact didn't come into play this day. The only facts that the boys cared about are these. Blue racer snakes are blue. They are extremely aggressive, and they will chase you at a top rate of speed of about 4 miles an hour. That can seem plenty fast if you're running backwards and trying to negotiate through the underbrush at the same time. The three brothers were moving slowly and deliberately down a path that thankfully had already been blazed mostly by a bunch of some landowners' cows. Even so, it was barely passable with a heavy layer of rotten timber leaves and the occasional brushy limbs sticking out to swat at a person. The underbrush's attempt at regrowth for the current season was also underfoot and had to be contended with. On they marched, these three little soldiers, making all manner of noise as they tromped forward into the unknown. Jay was leading the march with Wes and then Wayne right behind him. Jay was looking ahead, watching for low limbs and vines, and keeping the troops, who followed, informed of each new hazard as it arrived. Wes directed all his attention toward the ground, a ways in front of them as he followed Jay. Wes was concerned with low crawling varmints, whether with or without legs. Wayne followed Wes and did not concern himself with anything other than the back of Wes. He didn't want to get lost or separated from his brothers. It was Wes who saw the snakehead directly in front of him at the edge of this trail. As the snake's head came into view through the grass and through the leaves, Wes yelled, "Snake!" When frightened, Wes's voice might begin on one key and finish on another. When he said snake, it was more like snake. Well, whatever he said, it was understood by the other troops. Jay looked down and stopped a few paces from the snake. Wes and Wayne stacked up behind him. Nobody moved or said anything for a long moment. The snake apparently was in the mood for a little fun because his raised head was turned staring toward the brothers, and they would later swear it looked like it gave them some sort of a snaky grin. This prompted Jay to whisper over his shoulder, "We gotta get out of here. That looks like one of them blue racer snakes, and he's gonna chase us." Backpedaling from whence they had just come, they commenced to tripping and stumbling and outright falling over one another. When they managed finally to get their collective feet in front of them, they ran all the way back to the railroad tracks before they felt safe enough to stop and turn around. Panting and wheezing, they discussed their next move. Wayne wanted desperately to quit and go on home. Wes wasn't sure he would go with the group. Jay wanted to go back in, but not before taking some target practice to get their sights of their bean flips correctly sighted in for accuracy. This was the agreed upon plan. With plenty of rocks to choose from, up near the railroad, they took turns hitting a snake-shaped stick that was laying on the ground near the trail entrance. Each had fairly good luck at shivering the twig's timber. Wayne, the youngest and the smallest, was the best shot. He could put a rock on the head of a sticky snake almost every time. They now possessed a renewed confidence in their arsenal of rocks. Having just conquered the evil stick snake, Jay decided it was time to serve them well with a walking stick. He picked it up and used it as a walking stick. Ready for whatever came next, the brothers re-entered the trail. Cautiously they advanced. This time all three of them were scanning the ground for that slinky blue menace that had chased them from their own private play area. Maybe because he was closer to the ground, Wayne saw the offender first and announced his presence ahead. Wayne babbled, Snagook, snake. Well, that wasn't enough of an alarm for Wes and Jay. The three of them, without consulting, aligned themselves shoulder to shoulder. They raised their weapons. In unison, they reached in a pocket for a rock, placed it in the leather rock holder, raised the stock's arm to length, and pulled back the rubber launching strips. The rock-laden leather pouches were right by their ears. King Arthur's archers displayed no better form. Upon release of these rocks, the result was not so perfect. Jay's load went well beyond the target, dusting the leaves on a blackberry bush. Wes's rock didn't do any better. It took a little wood from the stock on the exit, nearly hitting his thumb. Wayne's shot, however, was right on the money. His missile whistled straight to the head of the offender. It hit with enough force to apparently kill that snake and roll it over on its side at the same time. Soon, a vigorous display of congratulatory backslapping and general celebration ensued. Finally, they decided it was time to gather up this defeated warrior. They tried, as they were able, to show some respect for the fallen combatant. Jay approached the evil serpent slowly, with his new walking stick brought from beside the ranks. He stood as far away as he could and still be able to reach the snake. He poked at the snake. No response. He edged closer. Again, he probed the snake. Still no response. He got much closer. This time he was close enough to see the pattern on the snake's back. The snake was not blue. This snake had like the bark of a tree. James came to the realization of what had happened. What they feared was about to chase them, and what had attacked and they had just killed was in fact a 3.5-foot long tree branch that had a knot on the large end, and it bore an uncanny resemblance to a blue racer snakehead. Huh. Well, they'd come this far. It didn't seem fair for them to turn back and go home now. They needed to make it to the creek before they headed home. The sun was easing over the western sky, giving the brothers pause to consider the time. It was getting closer to sundown, and if they had good luck, there was just enough time to reach the creek. This meant they couldn't be deterred by any more beasts of the forest, wooden or real. Once there, they could test their bean flip skills further by taking aim at the odd frog perched along here and there. After annoying the frogs, who were in no real danger except for maybe Wayne, there would be just enough time to scamper home in time to get with the rest of the family for Sunday dinner and church. They also knew that Sunday dinner leftovers were usually a cut above weekday meals, and this sort of basic survival knowledge helped them keep their track of time so they would not overstay their limit. From the spot on the blue racer snake incident, they needed to only travel a few more yards before the trickling gurgle of the creek water made its presence known. They ran this little last bit and came upon an earthen shelf that overhung the water a little bit. From their place atop this overhang, they were positioned on the outside of a bend in the creek. The water was below them about 5 feet and flowing vigorously from the left to the right. This was a perfect vantage point from which to launch their rocky bullets toward the unsuspecting frogs, lizards, and water bugs below. The next several minutes were consumed in doing exactly that. Wes and Jay eventually ran out of rocks. They didn't even think about the possibility of needing it for the way home. Wayne still had plenty of rocks. Recognizing this fact, Jay suddenly regained his right-thinking role as the leader and declared group ownership of Wayne's remaining cache of armament. Wayne did not protest this seemingly prudent decision and handed over his remaining rocks for equitable distribution. From this sacrifice, Wayne was given 3 extra rocks. With these, he would have the honor of taking the last 3 shots before they must surely strike out for home. Wayne decided that his target would be an oddly shaped protrusion about 20 yards up the stream. A turtle was sunning on top of this object. Whatever this thing was below the water, the part that was visibly above the water looked like one of those pyramid things he'd seen in geography. Wayne placed his first rock in the bean flip pouch, pulled it back, and aimed at the object below the turtle. The rock hit the object with a resounding hollow thunk. The combination of the sound, the vibration, and the nearness of the rock ricocheted too close to the formerly sleeping turtle's head. That gave the turtle enough adrenaline rush to raise him off the water-bound object. He swam in the air even before landing in the water. As much fun as that was, watching a flying turtle might normally be, the brothers' attention was more focused on the object that produced the odd sound. "Do that again," said Jay. Wayne reloaded and aimed again. "Fire!" said Wayne, trying to add to the drama. His load one time again, and the sound came back, thunk. "Now this was getting interesting," said Jay. They moved down from their high vantage point up to a grassy spot on the ground, more at the same level as the water. As they got closer to it, the object became to look more like a shipping crate that was nearly completely submerged in the water. "Let's all go have a look at it," said Wes. He was anxious to have another shot at anything. They were directly across from the object now and only a few feet away. "Load up," said Jay. He followed up his first order with a predictable successful of others. "Ready and aim and fire." They all fired in unison and hit this target, not just once or twice, but 3 times. The target protested with an echoed pa-thunk, pa-thunk, pa-thunk. "We got to get a little closer look at that thing, whatever it is," said Jay. Wes reluctantly agreed, but Wayne, being overcautious, said, "How are we going to get over there to the other side?" Looking up and down the stream for a suitable crossing point, Jay saw none. At its widest, Lick Creek might be 12 feet across. In other places, a good jumper could leap it across. No places like that were in sight, either up or down the stream. Jay studied the object a bit. "Wes, can you see in the water to the front of that box as well? Just right around there to see what's holding it in place?" asked Jay. Wes gave his best eagle eye once-over. With the memory of his blue racer snake spotter mistake still freshly on his mind, he tentatively offered up his opinion. "It appears to be snagged on the root that's coming out of the bank there that goes up into the water there," said Wes. And he pointed right there in yonder. "That's what I thought," said Jay. "Wayne, do you think you could hit that root hard enough to cut it loose from that box?" Jay asked. With typical sureness of his own ability, Wayne, of course, said, "Absolutely, sure I can." Jay and Wes moved out of the way, giving Wayne free access to choose from the best possible launching position. Wayne studied the root, searching for a weak spot. He would prefer shooting at the part above the water. He knew if he shot into the water, the rock would slow down on impact. Even worse, it might bounce up the surface and fall harmlessly on the opposite side of the bank. As he watched the object being forced by the creek's flow, he began to see a rhythm in the back and forth motion of this root as it strained against the weight of this box. The root was bending at a single spot just barely above the water line. If the root were going to fail, that was going to be the spot it would happen. Wayne decided that if he could get a hit on that particular spot at precisely the point in time when the push cycle of the water against the box was at its maximum, then he had a pretty good chance of dislodging this box. Wayne got into firing position, which looked a lot like the Heisman Trophy statue. He explained his plan to Wes and Jay as he rifled through the rocks as they had a few left. He was looking for that one rock that might do a little cutting as it crashed into the target. He selected the best specimen available. Jay and Wes watched in awe of their little brother as he very carefully loaded the rock into the pouch. He then took aim between the forks of his bean flip stock and pulled back the loaded pouch. He hesitated a moment or two, and then he started to move the stock up and down in a predetermined cadence. Wayne would not have known the word synchronization at that time, but this is exactly what he was doing. He was synchronizing his movement with that of the bobbing tree root. Once he got the rhythm right, he let go of the pouch. The rock zinged through the air and hit the root at the precisely desired location. The precisely desired result occurred. The rock landed with a solid sound like the chop of an axe. The root responded with a cracking sound of its own and immediately released its captive. The box was free. Now at this point, things started happening for which a little pre-planning would have served them well. Unfortunately, no such planning had been made. Up to this point, all available resources had been committed to getting the box dislodged. Now that it was dislodged, it was moving downstream and gaining speed as it went. Jay acted first. He yelled, "Let's go, boys! She's gonna run off and leave us just standing here looking silly." Well, Wes already felt a little silly because he just stood there for a moment, still in shock that the little old Wayne only took one shot to cut that big box loose. For future reference, he told himself he needed to go look at that David and Goliath story in the Bible one more time. Wes finally regained his senses and in no time was in on the chase to stop that box. Jay had run past the box and Wayne followed, not necessarily knowing why. "We have to get downstream enough to be able to throw stuff in its path to make it come to us on our bank," said Jay to Wayne, and Wes also as he finally caught up to him. "Pick up tree limbs and stuff to throw as we run along," Jay said. The idea was soon abandoned. It became clear that anything that they threw in the water would float as well. They were right, as everything that they threw in acted as a companion to the box. When they reached the bend in the creek, Jay said, "This will be our chance. The box will come to our bank as it comes into this here bend." They all gathered at the bank's edge and waited for the box to show around the bend. They were about to retrace their steps when suddenly there it was. The box bounced up and down in the water, but oddly it never flipped over as it floated steadily toward the three brothers. Sure enough, the box floated right up to their bank of the creek, and they were even able to take a hold of its outer boards. Wayne went about the task with a little too much enthusiasm and wound up on top of the box, thus adding to the difficulty of taking control of the unruly wooden beast. It was too heavy to drag clear of this creek without someone going into the water. This duty fell to Jay as he was the oldest. First, he removed Wayne from the top of the box. Jay then removed his shoes and rolled up his pants as far as he could. Then, as Wes and Wayne applied a death grip to the boards that were nailed along this box, Jay begrudgingly slipped into the water on the upstream side of the box. The cold creek was a little bothersome, even though it was barely knee-deep. Positioning himself toward the lower end of the box, on the opposite side from Wes and Wayne, Jay said, "Okay, when I say pull, you two pull on that side as hard as you can, and maybe we can get it up on the bank." He was taking on a little water, but he tried his best to ignore it. He moved his feet alongside the creek bottom to find a good foothold. The bottom consisted mostly of forgiving, smooth, round, creek-washed stones. He was able to dig his toes in between the stones, like a batter digging into the dirt at home plate. He braced himself against the box, and then, satisfied with that, he was ready, and he said, "Okay, pull!" Well, the two on the shore tugged with all their might, with Jay gaining leverage underneath that box. It began to rise up toward the bank. They pushed and pulled until the box yielded and came to rest on its side on the dry land. Jay climbed out of the water with a great flare and gave an audible ta-da to pronounce the operation a success. As he looked at the box, it began to move. To their collective amazement, the box rolled over on one turn so that the original upside was up again. They stared at it a little bit longer, not knowing what it might do next. Was it going to sprout wings and fly off? They didn't know, but they thought it was a good idea to not anger it. The box seemed to have a mind of its own. A few moments passed without incident, so the brave three decided they were letting the day's events get to them and decided to move in a little bit closer. It was obviously some kind of packing crate, but what was in it? It was a cube that measured about 3 feet on every edge. By Jay's estimation, it weighed about 200 pounds. They eased up close enough to examine it, but still maintained a readiness to flee the area immediately should the box demonstrate any other unexplainable characteristics. Creeping to within a few feet, they could see that something was stenciled on top of the box. Their spirits soared, certain now that the stencil message would surely shed light on what was inside of it. "Hey," said Wayne, "what does that say?" Jay brushed away a layer of mud and the muck, and in very faint black letters were the words, "Often see bis Wachnachten 1941 nicht." Often see bis Wachnachten 1941 nicht? They saw the words in their minds, but bouncing them around on their tongue was a different matter. Wayne gave it a shot and said, "Off sea biscuit whiny acting 1941 night." Wes didn't fare much better. "Off 9 says bees win nectar 1949 niche." Jay decided not to even try to read aloud, but guessed it was German. "What are we going to do now, boys?" said Jay. "I don't know about this thing, but we got to go home." He didn't look forward to making Mama mad by causing a late start nighttime church. "I think we should head for home too," said Wes. Jay agreed, but wondered aloud, "What are we going to do with this box?" His mind racing, Jay continued, "Okay, here's what we'll do. Let's try to cover it with some dead wood and some leaves so nobody else will see it and come get it. We'll come back here tomorrow morning with tools to open this here box." "Why don't we write down what it says on the label and maybe get someone to tell us what it says?" said Wes. "Good idea," said Jay. "Yeah, good idea," said Wayne. "But where are we going to find a pencil out here in the woods?" asked Jay with a hint of sarcasm. "Matches," said Wes. "I've got matches in my pocket." "So?" said Jay. "So this," said Wes. "If we find some smooth, dry tree bark and we burn some of it, we can write on another piece of bark." "Pure genius. Pure genius," said Jay. "Yeah, pure genies. Can we go home now?" asked Wayne, having recently completely lost track of the conversation. "Just a little bit longer and we can go," said Jay. Jay explained the plan to Wayne and asked him to gather a bunch of sticks, limbs, and leaves to hide this here box. Wayne set out to do his duty with a vengeance. The sooner he covered the box, the sooner they could go home. Wes was doing his part by starting a small fire in preparation of an operable writing instrument. Family history suggests, nightly or not, that Wes was the best candidate for making a fire. At barely 3 or 4, he was allegedly discovered under the house with a flaming match holding it up to a wooden underpinning. Several spent matches were reportedly lying around on the ground. He was never charged, let alone ever brought before any family jury of his peers to be tried for that offense. He will, of course, even now, vehemently deny any wrongdoing. Nevertheless, Wes's fire was going good, and soon he had several burnt sticks that could serve as a good charcoal pencil. Jay chose a pencil stick from the fistful Wes offered. Holding a slab of bark in his palm, Jay transcribed the words from the box to the bark. He even included the little dots over the O. Wayne saw to it that the box was well covered. It may not have been inconspicuous, but it was certainly disguised. He made a pile about 6 foot high with leaves, limbs, dirt, and the occasional strategically placed cow patty, used primarily as a binding agent, the last ingredient he got from the trail along which they had traveled. Satisfied that the area was secure for the night, the three adventurers lit out for home, taking care not to accidentally discover any more binding agents along the trail. "Mama, the boys are here," said Janice. She was a year younger than Jay, but they were sort of like twins. He missed his first year of school due to a broken leg. He got the broken leg when he had an unscheduled exit from a tree, and it was followed by a predictably ungraceful landing. Since then, they were in the same class at school. The boys filed in and got a once-over from Janice as they entered. This was for their own good, since it would be Mama who gave them the overall look-over. "Where you boys been? You got mud splatters all over y'all." That was Janice. "Oh, Niecy, we was just down by the Lick Creek. We might have fallen in a time or two, that's all," said Jay. He spoke for all three of us as he signaled behind his back and Wes to clam up. They obliged, and all three marched away dutifully as Janice pointed them to the wash pan on the back porch. "Sunday best for these three men on Sunday. You wear your newest pair of Big Smith brand overalls." Jay, being the oldest, wore the newest on the sliding hand-me-down scale. Later, after my brother Richard and I got put in the mix, the rules changed. The hand-me-downs went by age. Rule was modified to provide for a situation when the biggest was not necessarily the oldest. "You guys just barely made it," Wilma said, with just a little bit more snootiness than was called for. "Daddy is starting the car, and Mama already has her hanky spit washed Richard and Lyndon," she said. Wilma was doing her best to enjoy someone else being in trouble instead of her, even if it was just potential trouble. She could at least make them sweat a little bit. High drama was her specialty. Disclaimer, I don't mean that in a bad way. Our family car was a 1934 Ford sedan that Daddy converted into a truck. 3 or 4 of us could sit in the front if someone sat in somebody's lap. The rest of us riders went to the bed of the truck. The church house was only about half a mile from the house, so if it got too awkward, having 9 people piled in the truck, you could always walk. Walking toward church was okay. Walking home after church was not so attractive. Nobody wanted to be late for that supper. Up the road over the railroad tracks, turn left at Mills General Store. Continue past Hedgecock Combination Texaco Filling Station, Grocery, and Post Office on the right. Then go another long block and we pull in the First Baptist Church, soon to join the other members inside. This is the same church that Wesley again alleged caused a sensation with his out-of-sync ending to a congregational song. Wes was not quite finished with the only song he knew at the time, which was a crude version of Yankee Doodle. He sang, "Yankee Doodle went to town with a load of switches," just as the others finished a line rendition of the Old Rugged Cross. Wes then finished with his last line quote, alone with the full attention of the congregation, and he bellowed, "And down came his britches." Eventually, church service ended and the Poole family returned home. After dinner, bedtime came, and the boys could finally discuss their day's adventure freely. Well, they did have to keep the chatter low enough as to not arouse the curiosity of the younger ears nearby, meaning Richard and me, and all the 5 boys were in one bedroom with 2 beds. The older 2 had one of the beds, the younger 3 had the other. Wayne had to visit the older boy's bed long enough to catch up on the plan for the next day. Jay was speaking. "Well, What we got to do first is we have to talk to Daddy and borrow some of his tools. Then we'll go to see old Estes Kaiser. I heard tell he might be German. If that message was in German, he could maybe help us. After that, we go back and check on the box. He had been thinking about that box all through church and dinner and had the next day's plan all worked out. Secure in his own understanding of the plan, Wayne rejoined his two younger brothers in bed number 2. Soon the sleeping noises filled the room. Wes's pet chicken, Old Roundhead, woke them up the next morning with a pretty good imitation of a woodpecker as he pecked staccato style on the window pane near Jay's head. Jay bolted upright at the sound of this racket. "Wes, that dang chicken is going to get it one of these days if he don't stop scaring the fool out of me in the morning." Jay growled. "Oh, Jay, Old Roundhead doesn't mean to scare you. He just wants me to come outside and push him around in the little wheelbarrow. You know he's not right, so give him a little slack, please," pled Wes. "Well, I guess we better get to moving," said Jay. "Hey, Wayne, wake up," he yelled across to the other bed. Too late. Wayne and his bed partners were already taking their places at the breakfast table. Jay and Wes had to catch up. "Morning, boys," said Daddy. "Y'all got a big day ahead of you?" Now, this is just the kind of trick question that parents like to ask when they have something they want you to do. Knowing this trap all too well, Jay responded with a non-committal answer, something like, "Yeah, we've promised to do a couple of things down near Lick Creek. Now, if you don't mind, we'd like to borrow some of your tools." Jay surprised himself by asking this. He figured they would just borrow them without asking, as long as he made sure they put them back. Daddy pondered on Jay's request for a moment, and then he said, "Well, I reckon if you're man enough to ask, then you're man enough to put them back when you're done. Go ahead, take what you need." Boy, this day was turning out better all the time. After the blessing, the food passing started around the table. Our chickens were not laying many eggs due to the changing weather. So when the egg platter came around, it was understood that we only were allowed half of an egg until egg production returned to normal. When Jay started working at the mill, he graduated to a whole egg like Daddy because he was a-working. For now, though, he too was allowed only a half. All in all, the half egg with buttered biscuits and milk gravy made for a surprisingly good morning meal. "Can we go and work on our project now?" Jay asked. Now, this request was directed mainly toward Mama, since she had dominion over the kids during the day. Daddy looked at Mama. Mama looked back, and then she gave Jay a nod of approval. "Go on, get out of here, you boys," she said, and took a loving swing at them with a dish towel as they made their hasty exit. Wayne was last to leave. He was slowed down a little bit because he took one more look at his plate to assure himself he had sopped it clean with the last pinch of the last biscuit that he'd eaten. More to himself than the others, Jay said, "Well, we'll need a claw hammer, a hatchet, a handsaw, and a screwdriver." "How about some rope?" Wayne asked. Then Wes chimed in, "You think we might need a hacksaw?" "Hey, hacksaw's a great idea," said Jay. "How about some rope?" Wayne asked for a second time. "And a pair of pliers? We'll need them," Jay said. "How about some rope?" shouted Wayne for the third time. "Rope?" Jay said, finally listening to Wayne. Yeah, we'll need some rope." All of this was high-level decision-making. They gathered up the tools, and Jay gave the tool sermon to his younger brothers as it had many times been given to him. "Now, Daddy says you should always use the right tool for the right job, and when you are through with the tool, you should put it back in the tool shed where you got it. If you are using the tools away from the tool shed, always lay the tools out on a blanket or cloth to keep the tools together. until you can return them back to the shed. We need to roll these towels up in a blanket." The boys made their way out back of the house by the dog pen, chicken coop, and combination feed barn, and tool shed. "Get that blanket the dogs have been using, Wes," Jay called out. Wes said, "I ain't going back into that old dog pen. Last time I went in there, old Buck tried to eat my thumb off." Wayne went into the dog pen without waiting for his order, entered, and quickly fetched the blanket. As he gave the tools to Wes, he gave him a look like, "What's the big deal?" They rolled the tools up in the blanket. "Okay, let's go see Estes Kaiser," said Jay. When Mr. Kaiser's doorbell rang, he never expected to see these three young boys standing more or less at attention on his front porch. He opened the door cautiously. "Hello, Mr. Kaiser. My name is J.M. Poole. They call me Jay. And these are my two younger brothers, Wes and Wayne. Mr. Kaiser, we have something written down that is not in English, and we just thought that you might be able to help us with it," said Jay as he introduced the group and their problem all at once. "Why would you think I could help?" said Mr. Kaiser. "Well, we are guessing it is German, and we thought that, you might be able to read it since your last name is Kaiser," said Jay. "Well, this is your lucky days, boys. I'm not German, but I can read German text," Mr. Kaiser said. "Show me your mystery message." Jay brought out the bark remnant he had kept and hidden till now. Estes Kaiser looked at the bark and struggled with the charcoal scribbled block letters. He walked to the edge of the porch to get better light. Jay had kept the bark inserted partially into his pants. Much of the charcoal transferred directly to his stomach. His belly button provided additional punctuation. Estes gave the bark his undivided attention, and suddenly he shouted, "Aha! It says, 'Do not open until Christmas, 1941. Yeah, that's what it says." The boys just stood there with their mouths open. This development was definitely unexpected. "Okay, Mr. Kaiser, well, thank you very much for your time," said Jay. He was trying to back out of there before more questions came. "Say, where did you boys come upon that message?" said Mr. Kaiser. "Oh, it was just a school project that didn't get completed before they let school out," Jay lied. "They said their goodbyes and lit out for Lick Creek and a big dirty pile of leaves, dirt, stick, and cow poop." Mid-morning was approaching already, and the sun provided warmth to the morning that started out rather chilly. The boys took turns carrying the heavy bundle of tools as they made their way back to the box. Jay took the longest shift, as the tools were his responsibility. He watched over them, though, when it was Wes's or Wayne's turn to lug the makeshift tool bag. Or was it a tool wrap? Either way, they found themselves far enough along that they were now behind the church house on the other side of the tracks. "Hey, where are you guys going?" said a voice from the church side of the railroad tracks. The Poole boys screeched to a halt and turned in the direction of the voice. "That sounded like Leon," said Wes. Leon Warren was the next to youngest of three boys and two girls who lived just down the hill from our house. He was about equal to Wes in size and in age, but that is about as far as the comparison held up. "Stand up and show yourself," said Jay. Leon climbed to the rest of the way up to his side of the tracks to make himself visible. "I got scared because I thought y'all was some hobos or something, carrying that bundle and all," said Leon. We've got business to attend to, said Jay. That sounded pretty important to Leon, even if he didn't understand why. The thing was his curiosity was stirred, and it required a feeding of some kind. Jay sensed Leon's dilemma and tried to toss Leon a verbal bone. "Oh, Leon, these are Daddy's tools, and he asked us to bring them up to him at the planer mill," said Jay. He was trying to throw Leon off the trail. Leon said, Well, why didn't he take him himself when he went to work this morning?" Jay pondered this for a second and said, because he was running late and he didn't have time to gather them up. Oh, said Leon. His curiosity apparently was satisfied, and, well, can I go too? No, sorry, said Jay. No kids allowed on the sawmill property, you know. But y'all are kids, whined Leon. Yeah, but our daddy's the boss, said Jay. Leon took this as final and started to turn and leave. He looked so pitiful that Jay said, Wait a minute, Leon. Jay turned to Wes and Wayne and simply said, Well, fellers, what do you think? Wayne, being the smallest and the quickest to tire, said, Well, hey, he might be some help with carrying these tools and opening the box. Yeah, said Wes. We might need him to carry what's in the box, too. Okay, it's settled then. Leon, come on back. We want to let you in on our project. Well, Leon, of course, brightened up considerably and bounded over to join them to make it a 3-pool and 1-Warren team. Up the right-of-way they went, with Jay explaining to Leon some of the details of their adventure up to this point. Leon was still a little confused. By the time they passed a point where they should have turned left, as if going to the sawmill, he stopped and asked, Hey, why ain't we going that way? He didn't realize until that moment that Jay had lied to him. Far from being angry, Leon was impressed with the smoothness of Jay's delivery. He was a pretty good liar himself, who practiced this art with regularity. Jay was feeling a little less than perfect with the recognition that he might be as good a liar as Leon. That was something he did not aspire to be. He made a mental note to do better. On they went, with Wayne leading the way. What he lacked in size, he more than made up with his irrepressible enthusiasm for what was to come. After he got a little ahead, Wayne stopped. He looked back at the others and yelled, Hey, Leon, you know how to tell if a train's coming around the bend? No, how? Don't you just look down the tracks? Leon answered. Wayne got down on his knees and started to put his ear to the tracks. Wait, Wayne, hollered Jay. Wayne rose up. Well, what's wrong? He asked. I was just going to show Leon here how to do something. Jay said, I know, but you might want to try a different way. Wayne persisted. No, this is how I do it, and I'm going to show Leon. Okay, said Jay. Don't say I didn't warn you. This only confused Wayne, and he was starting to doubt his older brother's wisdom. Wayne continued. Leon, what you do is you stick your ear down on the tracks like this. It was at this precise moment that Wayne recently departed high regard for Jay's wisdom returned. It was also the exact same moment that his ear touched the tongue stuck to a flagpole like ice-cold steel railroad track. Wayne's high-pitched young voice likely woke up any late-sleeping dogs as he squeaked out a blood-curdling yow! He then began to perform the universally recognized dance of someone in great pain. This is the one where the injured party jumps around and screams while demonstrating all manner of violent body language consistent with the person apparently trying to shake it off. The others waited for the dance to finish. Leon was a little frightened by all this, and as soon as he could be heard over Wayne's oral sputtering, he asked, So does that mean a train's coming or not? Still not getting it. Leon gave his opinion of Wayne's method. Looks like that'd be hard on your ear to do that many times. That was not what he wanted to show you, Leon, said Jay. He was going to feel for vibrations, only he forgot that the train rail would be real cold. Wayne, can I tell you the other way now? Yeah, I guess so, said Wayne. He cupped his hand over his ear, somehow hoping it would reduce the pain. Jay said, Okay, if you think the rail may be too cold, or too hot for that matter, what you can do instead
of sacrificing your ear is to sprinkle a few grains of sand on the rail. Then you watch these grains up close. If they start to jump around, well, there's a train a-coming. That's good to know, said Wayne, a little bit frostily. He wished he'd listened earlier when Jay first offered to tell him. Let me try it, said Leon. He scooped down to the lower edge of the right-of-way and used his hands like a front-end loader to scoop up a double handful of sandy dirt. Determined not to spill any of the sand, Leon sort of waddled back to the side of the right-of-way. He tried his best to keep his balance while keep both hands cupped together under his earthen load. Here you go, said Leon. He dumped his double hand load of sandy dirt on the nearly flat top surface of the track. Jay looked at Leon's composite deposit of sand and dirt and rocks, and he said, Leon, we only want to know if a train is coming. You don't want to stop it when it gets here. You only need a little, so you can watch if the individual grains of dirt dance on the track. Oh, I got it, said Leon. I got it. He brushed away most of the dirt and watched intently. It ain't doing nothing. Good. No trains then, said Jay. Now maybe we can get on with our destination. Town was becoming less visible behind them as they rounded the bend in the railroad tracks. Wes and Jay were walking in the graveled outer edge. Wayne and Leon took turns, with one of them stepping from one railroad tie to the next, while the other tried to best their own personal record for rail walking. When they got too far behind, Jay yelled, Come on, you two! We're cutting over the woods here in a second and you'll get lost. Leon heard the word lost and immediately called in all his available resources and applied them toward catching up to the leaders. Wayne found his own supply of resources having momentarily been left in Leon's dust, and he caught up as well. We're just about there, aren't we, Wes? Asked Jay. I think so, said Wes, because this looks like one of those cows up there a ways that made the trail we was looking for. Okay, guys, be watching for the trail, said Jay to the whole group. There it is, said Wayne as he recognized the spot where he had loaded his pockets with rocks the day before. Leon, you got a bean flip? Wayne asked. We might need to pick up a few rocks. Sure do. Good 'un, too, Leon said with the obvious pride as he pulled out his bean flip from somewhere deep in his overalls. Why don't you just put that in your back pocket, said Jay. Okay, but I got to be careful I don't poke my fog with it, said Leon. Jay started to ask about the frog, then maybe decided it was best to just keep on moving. Following the smaller Wayne, who was now in the lead again, the group of four turned off the right-of-way and began the short trip once again down the cow trail to the banks of the mighty muddy waters of Lick Creek. So Jay started immediately to coach Leon on the need for absolute secrecy about all that he was about to see, and that Leon was to count himself especially honored to have been included in this adventure. There was no worry on this point because Leon genuinely felt himself lucky to be a part of this thing, whatever it was. Jay further told him that he could not tell anyone or talk to anyone about their adventure outside this group of four. This part would be hard for Leon, but he was willing to give it his best effort. Soon they reached the cleared area near the creek. Wayne, still in front, ran to the monument he had most single-handedly Wayne, still in front, ran to the monument he had almost single-handedly constructed of decaying forest refuse. Here it is, said Wayne. He was unable to contain his excitement as he started peeling back the layers of his own pyramid of poop. Leon asked, What is that, and what's Wayne doing to it? Jay explained quickly as Wayne attacked the pile. That happens to be our prize. Under that pile is a box, and on that box is a label. And on that label it says in German, "Do not open until Christmas 1941. We're a little late, but we're going to open it as soon as we get it uncovered." With the prospect of a share to some sort of booty to be found within the box at the bottom of that pile of muck, Leon joined the fray with Wayne. As the refuse fell away and the box became visible, Jay asked, "Leon, where are the tools you were carrying?" Jay had a sudden sinking feeling, realizing it was probably bad judgment on his part to have entrusted the carrying of the tools to Leon in the first place, but he waited for the answer. Leon unconcernedly answered, "The tools? Oh, I must have left them back there on the track by the railroad tracks when I went down to scoop up that sand." Jay thought Leon should be showing more unease over the tools he had lost, so he yelled at him, "Leon, you get back to that railroad track and get those tools right now, or you ain't going to be a part of this deal anymore. You hear me?" Leon apparently read Jay's temperament correctly. He didn't wait for the echo of Jay's voice to land before he lit out for the tracks. He put aside his fear of the unknown and going it alone. He replaced them with his immediate fear of Jay. If that wasn't enough to motivate Leon to action, the sudden realization that he might lose out on the share of the booty, whatever it was in there, put fire to his feet. By all accounts, Leon went away and came back so fast that his footprints gave off steam wherever his feet touched the ground. Leon dropped the tools, still wrapped securely, on the ground. Then he dropped to his knees with his hands now on the ground and gasped a nearly inaudible, "I'm sorry." Jay patted Leon on the back and repeated something he'd heard the preacher say the day before. "Well done, thy good and faithful servant." Leon nearly beamed, but his batteries were just too low at the moment. Wayne was done with the task of earth, stick, and poop removal. The four of them stood around the box. Leon felt grateful to be included. They stared at this box for a little bit, and as they did, Wes noticed that from his vantage point that another label was visible. There seemed to be a phrase that was repeated many, many times in many, many languages. The boys all moved to Wes's side where they too could see the lettering. With all of them looking together, a certain part of the list of phrases became more and more readable. It was the English version of the phrase. Could it be that by just looking at it and searching for their language that it appeared more visible to them? Was there some kind of magic coming into play? This was territory that Leon and his family were more familiar with since they believed in haints and other sorts of ghosts. Leon was not amused by this possible connection to another world. Regardless of their concerns, it was easily apparent to them that in English the label said, "This side up." Another label, again on Wes's side, reacted to their gaze in the same way. It said, "Remove from this side." Jay said, "Let's get to it." He got down on his knees to open up the tool blanket. Leon saw Jay's movement and he asked Wesley, "We going to pray over the box or something?" "No, silly. He's just getting set up." The blanket made an inviting surface since it was, dry and covered the ground, which certainly was not. "All the tools are still safely in my charge," Jay said to himself. He continued the task of laying out the tools on the blanket and momentarily imagined himself a highly skilled surgeon doing a final check of his instruments before beginning a great surgery. He didn't know at the time how close his imagination had become. Jay studied the edges of the box where the sides joined together. "Wes, let's try the nail puller first," said Jay. "Which one's the nail puller?" asked Wes. "Oh, come on, Wes. It's that flat piece of metal there with a V-notch on each end. One end is bent and at a right angle for leverage." "Okay by me," said Wes. "I can't wait any longer to get at this thing." Jay commanded, "Okay then, nail puller." Wes surveyed the array of tools laid out on the blanket and located the one that Jay just described. Wes slapped the instrument into Jay's outreached palm, waited patiently for the next order. Paying close attention to the instructions on the box, Jay wedged the sharp edge of the unbent end into the junction of two sides. He planted his feet for balance, then he said, "Stand back, y'all. I'm going to pop this thing open." They did as told and gave Jay plenty of room. Jay made himself rigid as he gripped the nail puller again. Then he gave out a mighty grunt, the echo of which caused Leon to spin around in wonder as to where the monster that uttered that sound. Jay put forth another grunt and used all his strength into one big fast tug against the nail puller. The nail puller became dislodged. Jay went generally in the direction of a nearly fresh cow patty that even Leon had successfully avoided at this point. Jay landed with a squishy backside slide. To his credit, he still maintained his double-fisted grip on the nail puller. He looked up in awe and recalled the previous day's experience with the box. He watched today as the box tipped over and rose up off the ground. It was just high enough to allow it to spin end over end for several revolutions. The group of four became the group of three again as Leon found this last bit of black magic just too much to handle. He left the air screaming reportedly, "I didn't see nothing! I didn't see nothing!" That left the three pools to finish up the project on their own. The box finally stopped and resettled to the ground in the same position as before. Jay said, "Well, boys, looks like it's up to us again." Wes and Wayne joined Jay as he very carefully approached this box again. "Wasn't that something?" said Wayne, trying to catch his breath while trying not to show it. Wes nodded in agreement, but didn't say anything. What we'll have to do is two of us sit on the box while the third uses the nail puller. That way we can get the needed leverage," said Jay. Wes and Wayne knew who the box sitters would be and who the man holding the nail puller would be. They reluctantly took their place on top of the box. Once again, Jay put the nail puller, two teeth, on it straight in to just inside the joint. This time he tried pulling with a slower, even pressure. All the time he kept a firm grip on the nail puller. Finally, they heard the desired sound of a metallic nail scraping against the hardwood fibers. Then the nail started to come loose. Squeak, squeak, came the sound. To the open box to examine its contents. The box was empty. "Empty?" yelled Jay. "I sat in a cow pile for empty? There ain't nothing in there but a little smoke." They stared at the smoke, trying not to be too disappointed. "Hey, wait a minute. Something is in there," said Wayne, getting itchy feet of the Leon variety. The smoke began to move in a very orderly manner. It was not doing it based on external air movements. This was movement that was somehow predetermined by design. The flow of the smoke was as though 4 panels of glass were projected to come to the center of the box. The smoke moved toward the center. The smoke moved toward the center. It continued to do this until Jay said, "Hey, there is something in there." He moved in for a closer look. "It's another box, a tiny little box right there in the center," said Wes. No, corrected Jay. "It's like a little car or something." Wayne moved to the front for his own close-up look. Suddenly, he stood up. He turned around to face his brother and turned as white as a sheet. He had a look of wonderment on his face. "What is it?" asked Jay. "Yeah, what is it, Wayne?" repeated Wes. Finally, Wayne spoke. It's a teeny little Santa sleigh." Okay, Chapter 4. The three boys were now on their knees as they concentrated on the contents of the light-filled box. They gathered in shoulder to shoulder and eased up very close to the box. They were strangely unafraid of this very special container and the tiny item inside it. Their silhouette made a striking scene as they knelt before the brightly lit small stage. Even a casual observer would draw a parallel to the three wise men at the manger. The boys ran their eyes over every square inch inside, and they were in awe. For some reason, they felt pleased rather than scared by the experience. Jay said, "Would you look at that?" And Wayne said, the colors are kind of Christmassy. Indeed, the colors were Christmassy. The intensity of the colors waxed and waned, much like that of the northern lights. At its peak, pure bands of red, white, and green planes of light moved freely within the box. When one colored light dimmed, when one of the colored lights dimmed to nearly nothing, the cyclical intensity of another color repeated the brightness cycle. All the while there was a golden sparkly twinkle dust falling away from the lights and drifting toward the bottom of the box. "It's like a Christmas present turned inside out," said Wes, being poetic. Jay asked the others, "Y'all notice how all the light and stuff and the smoke and stuff is either moving toward or away from that tiny thing in the middle?" Wes said, "Yeah, that little thing is either sucking in all the juice or pushing it all out. It's hard to tell which." Wayne said, "I think it's breathing." "I think you're right," said Jay. "The more it breathes, the brighter the thing in the middle gets. I may be wrong, but I think it might be getting bigger too." Jay stood up, and the other boys stood up too. "You know what?" said Jay. "I bet that sleigh is going to grow to full size if we open the box way open." "Maybe we ought to close it back then," said Wayne. "I think you're right," said Jay. He was trying to speak calmly as to not start a panic. "Let's put this cover back on and see if it shrinks again. We are definitely going to have to get this whole box back to the house so we can work on it in private." A flurry of activity ensued, and the boys were able to recapture their prize within the box. Except for the odd bent nail here or there, they got the box good and closed up again. The light show seemed to stop, so they figured it was under control. With that done, they pondered the problem of getting it home without arousing too much interest from all the neighbors. "Have faith, boys," said Jay. "The solution will present itself in due time." Well, if Jay had it all figured out, there was no need for the younger two boys to expend any more brain power on the issue, so Wes and Wayne quit worrying about it. That is, until he said, "Hey, we need to get this out to the railroad tracks." "What?" yelled Wes a little too loudly. "To the railroad tracks," Jay repeated. "How we going to get it there?" asked Wes. "Tools," said Jay. "Tools. We have everything we need to build a land barge. Wayne, get all them tools together." "We don't need much more than a hatchet and some rope," said Wayne. "Well, I think you're right, Wayne. By the way, I'm sure glad you insisted on us bringing that rope," said Jay. Jay took only a few quick chops to cut down two like-sized, long, skinny pine saplings. He used small branches from them to cut off several short rungs for the ladder he was laying out on the forest floor. The rope was actually cotton clothesline that was normally used for, well, clothesline. Now it was going into higher service. Now it would act as the binding agent that would hold together the sled that in turn would support the box on its journey back to the railroad tracks. Time was the enemy now that a decision was made to transport the box back home. They were so focused on the box up to this point that they missed lunch altogether, even though they heard the sawmill whistle signal 12 noon dinner time. This would be difficult to explain when they finally got home. Unless a prearranged agreement had been made, Everyone was supposed to be present at every meal. As the dragging device neared completion, Wayne asked, "Hey, what are we going to tell Mama when we get home, Jay?" "Well, we'll tell her the truth. We'll say we found a box in the creek. We'll say we dug it out of the creek. Then we opened it up with Daddy's tools. Inside this box we saw this tiny little sleigh. Then this little sleigh started getting bigger and bigger because it was breathing these colored lights. That's when we put the lid back on and brought it all home. And that took a really long time to do. Yeah, she'll believe that, don't you think?" said Jay. Wes and Wayne looked at each other, and then they looked at Jay, and then they looked back at each other again, and they exploded into laughter at the sound of Jay's story. Never mind that it was true. It just didn't sound like it. There was no way Mama would believe this. Realizing this himself, Jay said, "Okay, funny boys, we'll worry about that when it's time to worry about it. Now let's move this box onto the dragging end of this here sled." Moving the box was easy enough. They tied it securely to the sled with the remaining length of the clothesline. If it ever got reassembled and reused as a clothesline again, it would be much shorter and have a bunch of knots in it. The dragging sled had about 10 or 12 feet of sapling extending out in front of the box with a couple of feet extending toward the rear. Jay positioned Wayne inside the first rung as the lead dog. "Wayne, we will depend on you to keep us on course, and when Wes and I'll stand back here on either side you a little bit, and we'll concentrate on pulling the sled forward. Okay, guys, are we ready to go?" Wes took hold of his side. Wayne gritted his teeth and began to lean into the rung in front of him. Jay took his own place in front of Wes. "Okay," said Jay, "let's move this load." They all grunted, and the sled moved. They took another step and another, and soon they were moving quite easily back up the trail. This trail had become so familiar to them in the last couple of days that they started feeling something akin to pride of ownership. Wayne already knew where all the stump holes were and all the narrow places where briars were a danger to bare arms and legs. The trip to the edge of the railroad right-of-way thankfully didn't take that long. "Caution" was the watchword as Jay called out, "Whoa, Wayne!" Wayne responded on hearing the command and stopped immediately, as did Wes. "What now, Jay?" said Wes. Jay looked up and down the tracks. He said, "Y'all just be patient for a bit." About the time the whistle at the sawmill blew and the distinctive combination of short and long blasts, which meant that 1 o'clock going back to work time had arrived. They had officially missed lunch. Jay let that slide even over the protests of both Wayne and Wes. With all that had happened, and Jay being the leader, Wes began to consider his options. One option was to use "he's the oldest, so it's his fault" defense, should the need arise. "Y'all be quiet, will you? I'm trying to listen for something," Jay said. They reluctantly got quiet, and Jay said, "You hear that?" They strained to hear something and heard nothing. There it is again," he said. They listened again. Wayne said, "Hey, I hear some clickety-clacking up the tracks yonder." "Hey, I hear some clickety-clacking up them tracks yonder there." Wes said, "Hey, I hear something too, but what is it?" Jay said in a superior tone, "That, my uneducated brothers, is a little bitsy, barely big enough to fit on the tracks handcar. A few have little putt-putt motors on them, but most are powered by way of pump handle. Now who do you know that works for the railroad and sometimes goes out in advance of his work crew using a handcar?" "Uncle Herval, that's who," said Wayne and Wes in unison. Only moments later the handcar came into sight.
it appeared to be going better than average speed. Also, the operator was pumping feverishly on the power handle. Soon it was apparent why. Behind the car about a mile was a freight train that did not seem to entertain any notions of stopping for the car. As he whizzed by on the cart, Uncle Herval yelled, "Help me get this rig off the tracks!" Then he pulled on the handbrake and began screeching to a stop. The boys trailed after him on a dead run. Wayne looked over his shoulder long enough to measure the train's progress. "It's still a-comin'! It's still a-comin'!" he said. The handcar was stopped and Uncle Herval was working hard to lift it up and flip it over and off the tracks. "Come on, boys! Help me lift! Help me lift! Quick!" he shouted. The train was getting closer. Uncle Herval allowed, "It'll be on us in a minute." This was not inspiring news to the three brothers, but if Uncle Herval was in it, then they were too. Together they had plenty of lifting power to flip over the car. It tumbled harmlessly down the side of the right-of-way. The boys and Uncle Herval went right behind it. While several seconds passed, the train got there. It seemed to the boys that the cowcatcher on the front of the locomotive might have brushed them on its way by. Add the noise of all the trailing boxcars and the screaming train whistle, and you have got the makings for a better-than-average adrenaline rush. Finally, the train passed and moved out of sight. "Well, boys," as Uncle Herval, as he dusted the dirt and right-of-way rocks off of himself, "how do you like the railroad business so far?" No one spoke for a little while. "Y'all want to help me get my car back on the tracks?" "Sure," said Uncle Jay. "Sure." "Why not?" asked Wes, as he took a quick peek down the tracks before he joined in to help. "Say, Uncle Herval," asked Jay, "you think we could hitch a ride back home on your car here?" "Don't know why not, since you boys helped me save it. It's, I guess, part y'all's now," said Uncle Herval. "Well, we also got this here box to bring home. Can we haul it too?" asked Jay. "Sure," agreed Uncle Herval. They flipped the car a couple of times to get it up near the tracks. They listened a respectful amount of time to assure themselves that no new trains were coming. Then they lifted and positioned the car back into place. Everybody piled on and they rode it back the short distance to where Everybody piled on and they rode it back the short distance to where Uncle Herval had passed up the boys. Once there, the boys pointed out the box to Uncle Herval. "Oh," he growled, "that's a pretty big box. I don't know if it'll fit." Jay offered, "Tell you what, let's put the box and the drag sled on the handcar with the box mostly hanging off the front, and we can all stand or sit on the part of the sled that sticks out the back of the handcar. That way we can counterbalance the weight of the box." "Worth a try, Uncle Herval." With the logistics kind of figured out, they drug up the box up the side of the right-of-way and placed it directly in front of the car with the front end of the sled facing the car. They lowered the front end onto the car, and while Uncle Herval lifted on the sled just behind the box, the boys readied themselves to act as the counterweights on the other end. The whole thing worked out perfectly. "Now, who wants to pump the handle?" asked Uncle Herval. Wayne was in the front, one of the counterweights, and he said, "I do." So off they went down the tracks and back to home. Jay was already thinking that with them bringing Uncle Herval with them for a late lunch, maybe they would not be in so much trouble after all. "Boy, Uncle Herval, this thing sure is fun to ride," said Jay. "Yeah, well, I guess it is," said Uncle Herval with one of his characteristic growled responses. "Jay, I reckon I've taken it for granted. Having you boys on here kind of brings back the fun to me, too. Say, by the way, what you boys got in that box anyway?" Wes, Wayne, and Jay all looked at each other. Jay decided to tell the truth and went ahead and said, "Well, Uncle Herval, Here's the story. Jay covered every detail as he told Uncle Herval the whole story of the box. By the time they reached home, Jay had told him everything they knew and understood and everything they didn't. They unloaded the box to the side of the handcar, then helped Uncle Herval move the handcar off the tracks. Uncle Herval gathered up the tools and the boys once again harnessed themselves to the dragging sled. It only took a few minutes for them to cross the last 50 or so yards of tall grass and gravel road that separated the tracks from the front of their house. "Hey, Mac!" yelled Uncle Herval as he walked in the front door. He called Mama by the nickname Mac, same as some of the other siblings did. Mac was short for Maxine. "Anything good to eat?" he continued. Mom met him in the hall and just smiled to see him there. He was something of a dashing figure as he stood there wiping off his shoes, and still standing there, he took off his work gloves and his pinstripe coffee can shaped railroader hat. He put them in the back pockets of his matching pinstriped railroader overalls. Then he greeted her properly. "What are you doing in these parts, brother?" she asked as they shared a hug. "Oh, just working a crew down the tracks a ways, that's all," he answered. "I got you boys with me. They were helping me some back up the track a ways. Sorry about making them late." The boys heard all of this as they eased into the house a little behind Uncle Herval. Jay thought to himself, "This is working out great. Uncle Herval's taking the heat for us." "Sorry we're late, Mama. If there's anything left, give it to Uncle Herval," said Jay. He was trying his best to sound both repentant and pitiful at the same time. Apparently it was working because Mama said, "Come on into the kitchen, Herval, and you boys get on in here too. I reckon we can scare up a little something for all of you." Uncle Herval leaned over to Mama as everybody walked toward the kitchen, and he whispered just loud enough to be sure the boys could hear. "Mac," he said, "these boys of yours have some kind of secret adventure cooked up that has something to do with that big old box they drug up to your front yard. They have told me all about it, and whether or not I believe all they told me, I don't know. The fact is they believe it, so please don't come down on them too hard, okay?" Mama looked over her shoulder at the boys and only slightly raised her eyebrow. We were all familiar with this primal parental temperament indicator, which mirrored Mama's opinion of our behavior by the relative height of the arch of that eyebrow. The higher it went, the more extreme the consequences for our bad behavior would be. Since it only went up a little bit, meant we were getting off with maybe just a warning. Unfortunately, it also carried the unspoken threat of a probationary period of up-close scrutiny. Mama said, "Y'all go wash up, and I'll get the food back here on the table. Herval, is that sawmill whistle not working?" She didn't wait for an answer, and he didn't offer one. It was clear to the boys that she was talking to them, and the next time they came in late, she may not be so forgiving. They did a rush job of washing their hands and face, then quickly and quietly found their places at the table. The biscuits were leftovers reheated from breakfast. That was all Wayne wanted. He used the tried and true recipe for sugar biscuits. First, he licked his recently washed right forefinger, and while it was still wet, he poked a deep hole inside this hot biscuit. Next, he stuffed a little butter in the hole, and then he followed with as many spoons of sugar as he could cram in. The last step to fill the void was as much pet brand evaporated milk as the biscuit could contain. To eat one of these delights, you had to hold it over the plate while maintaining the vertical, just like you might do with an ice cream cone. To eat one of these delights, you had to hold it over the plate while maintaining the vertical just like you would an ice cream cone. Wes and Jay liked biscuits, but they were more into variety. Variety in this case meant having as many as 3 vegetables, all green, with at least one of them having the last name of Beans. As Herval and Mama continued their impromptu visit, the boys tended to the task of finishing their meal. Ordinarily, nothing could distract them nor lessen the urgency of assuring themselves of an equitable share of the available rations. This was different. Even though the adults were barely aware of their presence, the boys tried desperately to conceal the tide of duplicity rising in their hearts. They knew that when Mama's sneaky detector antenna was activated, she could pick up on a guilty heart from miles away. "Hey guys, what say after we eat, we go play some ball?" said Jay. He spoke in a normal voice and punctuated his query with a subtle wink, hoping they picked up on the code. "Yeah," said Wes. "Let's play catch. All the stuff we need to play ball is right there in the front yard," Wes continued. Wayne missed the wink and asked a little bit too loudly, "What are you guys talking about? There ain't no baseball stuff in the..." Ouch! Wayne's voice stopped just as he was about to unknowingly activate the aforementioned sneaky detector antenna. The sudden impact of Wes's big foot against Wayne's very bony and tender-skinned shin was enough to stop Wayne in mid-sentence. He looked a dagger or two at Wes. Then the look changed to understanding. The change in Wayne's deportment was helped along by the silly grin Wes was sporting as he somehow was able to point toward the front yard using only his left ear. Yeah, let's get in some practice so we can be ready for the next game of workup," said Wayne. He was now on board with the newly established code word for the box. With that, the boys finished their meal in silence, quietly monitoring the progress of each other so they might all finish at the same time. With an exchange of nods, they confirmed each was done. "Well, we better go start our practice now," said Jay. "I'm right behind you," said Wes. "Me too," agreed Wayne. Thinking they'd pulled off a perfectly non-sneaky exit, the boys moved out of the back porch and onto the front of the house. They didn't even notice that Uncle Herval and Mama had quit talking altogether as the exit maneuver was implemented. The antenna momentarily shot up to max power as the result of Wayne's outburst. But the Let It Slide override module came on almost immediately. The antenna momentarily shot up to max power as a result of Wayne's outburst, but the Let It Slide override module came on almost immediately, so they were given a pass. Now, by the time Uncle Herval started back to the railroad tracks and back to his work crew, the boys had already pulled the sled and its cargo to the rear of the chicken house for further study. "Whoop!" yelled Herval. The boys were busy removing the box from the sled when they heard the call. "Well, we'll have to hold up a minute and go help Uncle Herval with the handcar," said Jay. "Come on then, let's hurry and get it done so we can get back here to this box," said Wes. As they took off around the chicken house toward the railroad tracks, Wayne thought he noticed something in the dark corners of the coop, and it was not a chicken. He started to say something to the others, but then he thought it'd be better to wait until they got back. "Yeah," answered Herval, using his trademark low, throaty, affirmative response that is now family legend. Minutes later, the handcar was set to go. The boys were about to say their goodbyes when Uncle Herval pulled off one work glove and dug deeply into his pockets of his overalls. He pulled out his hand, and inside it were 3 nickels. He said, "Here you go, boys. Go on over to Kirkland's store there and buy yourself some candy." Jay took the 3 nickels and stuffed them into his pocket. Jay, Wes, and Wayne all together said, "Thank you, Uncle Herval." They just stood there, so Herval asked, "Well, aren't you going to go on over there?" They looked at each other and ran first back toward the chicken house, then reversed course to go in the opposite direction towards Kirkland's. "Let's go get some candy," Jay said reluctantly. He didn't want to hurt his uncle's feelings. It's not every day someone gives you a nickel. So for the sake of good manners and continued future economic gain, he decided they better do what was expected. Right now, that meant hustle over to Kirkland's and blow that nickel on some candy, or at least make it look like it. "Goodbye, Uncle Herval," said Jay. The boys all waved as they crossed over the tracks and made a beeline toward the store. Herval waved back as he and his little handcar headed back up the tracks and out of sight. As they reached the back of Kirkland's store, Wes and Wayne began to lobby their share of the booty. Jay said, "I'll keep it for now until we come back later. Wes, you sneak back up to the tracks and make sure he's gone." Dutifully, Wes crouched like a bird-hungry cat after its prey and crept up to a point where he could see along the tracks. "He's plumb gone. So what now?" called Wes. Jay said, "Come on, Wayne, let's go back to the box." They caught up to Wes, and the 3 of them crossed back over the tracks. They were careful to look for trains, but paid most of their attention to the direction of Uncle Herval's exit. Once they were safely across the tracks, it became a foot race to the chicken house. Catching sight of the chicken house reminded Wayne of what he had noticed in there earlier. He was about to bring it up, but it wasn't difficult to run fast and talk at the same time. He was about to bring it up, but it was difficult to run fast and talk at the same time. As they reached the rear of the chicken house, Wayne realized what he had seen. Standing there by the box, waiting on them to return, was Leon, the chicken house spy. He had apparently been watching them before they left to help Uncle Herval. Having regained some of his courage lost earlier in the project, he was anxious to be brought back into the fold. Leon said, "I've been watching it for you. It ain't tried to fly off or nothing." He pointed to the box in an effort to prove his service to the matter of the mysterious box. "Well, Leon, you sure changed your tune. I never figured we'd ever see you, let alone get close to that box," said Jay. "Well," said Leon, I figured since you guys were able to bring that thing all the way back to here without croaking, well then maybe it'll be okay for me to be close to it too." "Well, okay, fellas, what do you think? Should we let Leon back in?" Wes and Wayne had an impromptu conference off to the side. It quickly became a heated discussion. Wes was agreeable to Leon's plea, whereas Wayne was not. Wayne reasoned to rest. "You know how skittish that Leon is. He'll probably mouth off to his brothers, and then we'll have them all poking around here." Wes countered with, "Okay, you may be right, but look at it this way. If we don't include him, he will sneak around here and watch our every move anyway. Maybe it's better just to take him back so we can keep an eye on him." Wayne responded to that argument with an alternate solution. He said, or actually whispered, "What if we take him back, but only with the condition that if he messes up again, we boot him out for good?" "Well, that's a good plan," said Wes. "That's a good plan." He turned to Jay and said, "We vote to take him back only if he agrees not to run off again and if he promises he will not tell anybody about our project, especially his brothers." Jay pondered this proposal for a minute as he looked back and forth from Leon, the candidate, to Wes and Wayne, the judges. With one last pontific tug of the chin, Jay raised a single indexed finger aloft and made the pronouncement, "Leon, you're in, but you're on probation." "Huh?" said the perplexed Leon. I'm on what?
Probation, said Jay. It means you are in for now, but you may be right back out again, for good, if you mess up and break one of the conditions.
Oh, I get it, said Leon. If I mess up, I'll be kicked out of my bunkie.
Now you're getting the picture, said Jay. What do you say we get busy? Since analyzing the situation and determining next steps is a natural part of being a leader, Jay began to list off the tasks at hand, itemize the things needed to do them, and make assignments accordingly. Wes and Wayne were okay with taking orders from Jay, but Leon was a little balky about it. Considering the shaky footing on which his participation in the project was based, he soon decided it was just best to do whatever they told him to do. Here's where we are, said Jay. We need to get this box off the skids, and we need to open up this box. The three underlings were listening attentively, and they nodded their heads at what each deemed an appropriate interval. This action made them look like a bunch of gophers bobbing up and down at the mouth of their individual gopher hole. Jay ignored the comical image they presented and continued. Before we open the box, we need to find a good place to secure it. He used the word secure instead of hide for two reasons. First off, it sounded way more important. Secondly, if he had said hide instead of secure, he was sure it would cause Leon to think about it too hard. He might accidentally cave to innocent inquiries as to where he had been off to lately. Jay continued, once we secure the box, we can proceed to the opening part. Now, have any of you geniuses got any ideas on where we can secure this box? That will also give us room to work on it in private. No one answered the call, so Jay suggested, what about the chicken house? Wayne, immediately seeing faulty thinking in this plan, said, the only room in there to work is up under the chicken roost. You get up there, and you'll get Bombo, Roundhead, and his friends. Not one to give up on a half-baked idea, Jay suggested, what if we cover the roost with something? Wes chimed in, yeah, there's an old tarp hanging on the fence in the dog pen. We could use that. Leon said, yeah, dog pen. Even though he was not sure of what he just agreed to, Leon needed to participate on some level. Jay's inflection began to sound a little stiff, as though parliamentary procedure was setting in. Accordingly, he said, now that we've settled the requirement for a secure location, we can move to the next item, and that is, how should we go about opening the box? Do I hear any ideas on that? A little time passed, and amazingly it was Leon who spoke up first. Why don't you just do whatever you did the first time? Jay admitted, well, of course we can do that, but what I meant was, how are we going to do it without knowing what it'll do next? Well, Leon's right, said Wes. We got to do something, said Wayne. Yeah, Wes picked up where Wayne left off. Yeah, even if it starts to move and get bigger like it did last time, before we should be able to control it inside this here chicken house. All right then, Jay agreed. Let's get it off the skids and into the chicken house. I wished it would just go in there by itself, said Leon. And with that, the box began to tremble, and so did the boys. Leon was an easy mark for a joke, and he recognized it himself as well as anybody. Okay, who jiggled these skids while I wasn't looking? He looked directly into each face and knew from their responses that this was not a trick staged for his benefit. They all took another step backwards as the box began to tremble again. The clothesline lashings used by the boys to fasten the box to the skids began to crack and split and disintegrate right before their eyes. All that was left of the rope was a puff of smoke and the lingering odor of burnt string. Once the box was free, it moved. The box rose about an inch or so off the ground. Then it moved, or more correctly, it traveled along, making slow turns at right angles. It went straight into the chicken house doorway and eventually came to rest in the back of the house just under the roost.
Just before the box arrived, the roost had been populated to near capacity. It was almost empty now, and the yard outside the chicken house was full of confused and sleepy chickens. Only old Roundhead remained inside the chicken house. Apparently, experiencing an occasional hallucination was nothing new to this chicken. This vision may have been a little more realistic than most, but sure, the feeling would soon pass. It always did. This time it didn't pass. Old Roundhead hopped outside to join the other chickens, whose now numbers included 4 big-footed roosters dressed up in rip-torn shirts and knee-patched overalls. The loosely defined plan for careful exploration of the box was moving along fine. It seemed like all they had to do was consider a necessary action, and the box took care of most of the task itself. This was the lesson learned from Leon's offhand remark and the box's reaction to it. The box moved on its own, and in so doing fulfilled Leon's wish. Jay said, "Hey, go get the tarp that's hanging on the fence to the dog pen." Now, while his directive was aimed at the group in general, Wes was the first responder. "Oh, no, not me." The memory of Buck's sharply pointed teeth was still as fresh on his mind as the scar on his thumb. "You can pull it on the fence from the outside," said Jay. "Nope, I ain't going to do it." "I'll do it," said Wayne. He didn't wait for any further debate on the subject. He headed for the dog pen, which was just right behind the chicken house. As instructed, Wayne found the 9 by 12-foot canvas tarp draped over the dog pen fence. Most of it was on the inside of the fence. Grabbing a corner of the tarp, Wayne began to tug with all the strength he could muster. To his own surprise, he was actually making some progress. He took a short breather and looked around to ask for assistance from the others, who he would have half expected them to follow him. He found himself quite alone in this task. He could barely hear the others mumbling and could not see them as they were on the other side of the chicken house from him. Well, he regained his grip on the tarp and took another deep breath and gave it another mighty tug. The tarp was moving, and he was at this point where more tarp was on his side than on the dog pen side. "Won't be long now," he said between grunts. I'm doing it. I just about got it." With victory at hand, literally at his fingertips, a very strange thing happened. He mentally crafted his victory speech. He knew he would have to brag about it to the others when they saw him coming around the corner of the chicken house dragging that 9 by 12 tarp all by his little old skinny self. His speech and the words that were to be in it turned to vapor as the reality of the moment set in. Suddenly, his forward progress stopped, and he began to be pulled back toward the fence. A full-scale tug-of-war began on spot, with Wayne on one end of the tarp and Buck the boy-eating dog on the other. Wayne's relationship with Buck up to this point could be defined as a peaceful coexistence. Buck was beginning to scare him a little bit now, though. He started to yell for assistance, but then he realized Buck just wanted to play. If Wayne was going to go and get that tarp, he's going to have to outsmart old Buck. Well, having lost almost all of what he had gained in tarp footage, Wayne decided to try a trick on old Buck. He decided to use his sharply honed knowledge of various fishing techniques learned almost wholly around the perimeter of Messer Moore's pond. Wayne decided to let Buck have a little line and then jerk real hard to see if he could wrest the tarp from the monster dog's mouth. Wayne miscalculated the process a bit, whereas the fishing technique is more appropriate to the setting of a hook rather than allowing a release from it. A loosened grip followed by a sharp jerk only did 2 things. 1, Wayne lost more ground, and 2, Buck became convinced of his own imminent victory. Must try a new tactic, Wayne thought to himself. As Wayne turned to face his opponent, he noted that the tarp twisted a little while still firmly in his grip. "Aha," he said. "I've got you now." Wayne started twisting the tarp. After a few turns, the twisted lump of canvas made it to Buck, and he was forced to turn with it. Buck held his grip as long as he could. Then he would release it momentarily to get another hold with his big white sharp teeth. Each time he released for another bite, Wayne pulled with all his strength to regain his right share of the tarp. He was twisting and jerking and twisting and jerking. Finally, Wayne managed to get the whole tarp over on his side of the fence. With the battle won, Wayne sat on the ground for a moment to rest. He watched Buck as he also lay down himself and crossed his front legs in front of himself as he panted. The combatants lay there measuring the metal of each other through the fence wire. Wayne was certain he saw a smile in this dog's face. Wayne got up and began to drag his hard-fought prize to the chicken house. After his face-to-face encounter with Buck, somehow it just didn't seem right to go bragging about it. The matter was between him and Buck. "Here's the tarp. What do you want me to do with it?" asked Wayne. Jay said to the others, "Hey, let's get this thing into the chicken house and cover up the box." Dutifully, Wes and Leon followed Jay's lead as he grabbed a hold of a corner of the tarp. Jay was at one corner with Wayne on the opposite corner from him. Wes and Leon took a position opposite each other on the two other corners. Jay began to drag it toward the opening of the chicken house. The tarp moved with a jerkiness akin to rail cars bumping and lurching when a train's locomotive powers up from a dead stop. Jay was the locomotive. The boys holding the other three corners were the rail cars. The tarp wobbled about unevenly with each attempt by Jay to drive the tarp through to the chicken house door. Finally, the train moved in unison and Jay entered the doorway and the others followed. Once the tarp was inside, the task of maintaining any sort of coordinated forward motion was again thwarted. This time, the confined space afforded by the chicken house gave rise to an instant rebellion by three rail cars that had up to this point been following the locomotive without measurable complaint. All of this changed quickly due to the smallness of the interior space. Also, a negative contributor was the physical configuration of the interior. Oddly enough, it had apparently been designed for the comfort of a variety of chickens much smaller than those now struggling to maintain their footing, let alone their dignity. "What is that smell?" said Leon, always ready to miss the obvious. "Son, that there is grade A prime chicken poop," Jay responded. "What are you saying?" Leon further explored. Jay explained further. "I'm saying that squishy, sticky stuff between your toes is poop that didn't smell this much till we walked across it. Let's get this tarp spread out over the floor and over the box, then get out of here before somebody comes snooping around." With that, Jay gave an artful tug on the tarp and in doing so pulled Leon out of position. At that moment, Leon had the untimely misfortune of also hanging his shirt on a nail that was protruding from the outer wall. "Ow!" he yelped. The nail had scratched his arm and caused him to turn about as he released the grip on his corner of the tarp. Wayne had by then overcompensated for the general lack of space in the coop and had moved forward with his corner. He was feeling pretty good about his own progress of bringing up the rear, but then he fell victim to the consequences of his own doing. Prideful inattention caused him not to see Leon's plight. When Leon released his corner, it went to the floor of the chicken house. Wayne stepped on the accumulated portion of the tarp released by Leon. Wayne stumbled and then almost recovered his balance when his free foot found Leon, who was now laying face up on the chicken house floor. While visibility was not that good inside the chicken house, Wayne could see well enough to know he was about to land face down on top of Leon. Already in the process of falling, he garnered everything he had into defeating the laws of physics and gravity. If it was at all possible, he wanted to avoid landing squarely on top of Leon. His efforts were rewarded as he came to rest face down in the chicken poop layered floor right beside the very surprised and thankful Leon. Wes was still maintaining his position on the opposite side of the tarp during this entire hubbub. He was, that is, until he saw Wayne falling with arms flailing face down toward the poop-laden floor. His natural reaction was to laugh. that is just what he did, only he did it too soon. The extra load of the just-released tarp suddenly telegraphed its presence to Wes's side, and he too had to struggle to keep his death grip on the greasy green canvas tarp. "Jay, I'm losing it," Wes hollered. With that, he too became a victim of the interior design of the chicken house. The roost on which the chickens rested consisted of an array of 6-foot long by 1-inch square rails laid out like a stadium so that each successive rung was just a little bit higher than the last. The protruding end of one of those skinny rails entered the left sleeve of Wes's shirt just below the armpit as he struggled to work his part of the tarp forward. When his shirt, reaching the limits of its design stretchability factor, Wes was brought to a stop. The sudden jolt spun him around counterclockwise before releasing him to join the others on the floor. Laying on his back, he looked at the many tiny holes in the ceiling of the chicken house. He was moved to count himself much luckier than Wayne or Leon because he actually landed face up and on the tarp. Unfortunately, his celebration was premature. As it turned out, Old Buck had left a present on the tarp. As it turned out, Old Buck had Okay. As it turned out, that Old Buck had left... Give me a second. He was moved to count himself much luckier than Wayne or Leon because he actually landed face up and on the tarp. Unfortunately, his celebration was premature. As it turned out, Old Buck had left a present on the tarp from when it was hanging over the dog pen fence. The present survived intact just long enough for Wes to fall on it and smash it enough to reinvent its own peculiar perfume. "Oh, dadgummit," he said. "That stupid Buck got me again! He got me again!" Jay was suddenly the lone conveyor of the tarp. He had just witnessed the defeat of the other three, and he was about to give up himself. Jay said in disgust, "Can't you guys do one simple thing without getting all messed up with chicken poop and dog poop? All we need to do is spread the tarp on the floor, then cover this box. Is that so hard?" Leon was licking his wound. Wes was trying his best to flip the dog poop off his back and off of his shirt, and Wayne stood immobile as he frowned enough through the mask of brown and black and white chicken refuse. Jay was thinking he had chosen his crew badly when the floor of the coop began to liven strangely. The box was at it again. The chicken house gang retreated unceremoniously to the chicken house door before stopping to witness whatever was about to happen next. First, the tarp rose above their heads. It slowly fanned out evenly so that the whole of its rectangular dimension was visibly before them. It appeared now to be cleaner than before. It might have even been mistaken for new. It was new. It was clean. Not only was the tarp clean, but suddenly Wayne was clean too. All the icky, gooey stuff that had been hanging from his face like an old man's food-crusted beard was now gone. All gone. Leon's pain was gone. Wes no longer felt Buck's presence sticking to his back. The most amazing thing was the floor. That thick layer of chicken litter that had moments ago just covered the floor was now gone. Ordinarily, you don't think of the terms pristine and chicken house in the same sentence, but this chicken house was suddenly pristine. The tarp drew their attention as it spun about slowly and then curiously folded it neatly in half. It continued to rotate, and then it stopped rotating when it was rightly positioned above the box. Slowly, the folded tarp descended until it was at rest on top of the box. The tarp continued its downward travel and managed to drape itself completely over the box to where the tarp alone was visible, and only just barely visible at that. The boys had just managed a major breakthrough. They had witnessed another, for a lack of better word, mysterious if not miraculous reaction by the box. This time, though, they were not completely spooked about it. Fact is, they were feeling thankful for have been made better. Wes and Wayne certainly smelled better. The prospect of entering the house for supper with that stink still on them would have been their downfall. Further exploration of the box and its contents would have to wait another day. The decision to meet back at the chicken house in the morning was mutually agreed upon by all. Leon went on away towards his house, and the Poole boys went theirs. Trying not to think about the box and what miracles it might bring the next day was pretty much impossible to do. They would all have to try. For now, thoughts were more toward the immediate need for food. Supper was afoot.
Supper time and all the rituals tied to it came and went at the Poole's house. But for the apple butter fiasco, the whole evening might have passed without incident. While the major nutritional requirements for a family of 7 children were being met, there was always that odd time when no dessert was available. Certain store-bought items in this category were especially desirable. Close to the top of the cheap but tasty sweet list was apple butter. Mama would buy a big jar of the stuff on grocery day every 2 weeks. A day or two later, that jar was empty. Even when she tried to hide the jar, it only extended the process a day at best. As it happened, grocery day was the Saturday just past, and the jar was nowhere to be found. The boys, all 5 of them, toddler to teen, had exhausted all the likely hiding places. They had all but given up on the prospect of a meal-finishing course of apple butter slathered in the jaws of a great big cathead biscuit. The 2 girls in the family were practically speaking Mama's lieutenants, in that they were allowed to participate in food preparation stuff, as such were privy to the placement of the foodstuffs around the house. That would include knowledge of the as yet determined location of a big brown jar of Bama's best famous down-home apple butter. Yeah, well, Wes, whose equally famous sweet tooth had gotten him into trouble before, ventured an initial interrogative. "Hey, Niecy, you know where Mama put that apple butter?" Now, Wes delivered this query without the slightest hint of the fierce turmoil that raged within him. His sweet tooth was demanding immediate gratification, while his outer demeanor indicated only a passing interest in the sticky brown goo. Niecy, the eldest except for the slightly older Jay, replied cryptically, "Wes, you're looking too hard. Mama didn't hide it this time." Well, that just sent Wes into a full-fledged hide-and-seek mode. Determined more than ever to find the booty, he began anew the quest for the jar. After once again painstakingly examining every possible nook and cranny that previously had yielded the prize, he asked again. This time he addressed Wilma. Wilma, who was number 3 on the age scale and just younger than Niecy. Wilma's response gave him no more comfort than Niecy. "The harder you look, the less likely you are to find it," she said. "Boy, these sisters of mine can sure talk in circles," he thought to himself. Taking a moment to rest and ponder the very slim clues given him by his sisters, Wes leaned back on his seat. But as it happened, his seat was actually a bench with no back. He very nearly fell over backwards. With acrobatic deftness not usually attributed to him, he chanced to catch hold of the seat with both hands just as his feet engaged the underside of the supper table. The combination of these 2 actions saved him from the inevitable embarrassment of falling to the floor in a comical heap. From his new vantage point, though, he raised his head up enough to examine the miracle of how his feet had saved him from becoming the butt of another family legend. He looked at his feet, and then he looked just beyond them. Up to now, the apple butter quest had concentrated on looking at eye level and above where most things were stored around the house. Wes's feet were situated like a rifle sight that was aimed at a particular spot on the floor right next to the cook stove. His eyes widened and his breath became shallow as the realization of his discovery waved over him. He mumbled to himself involuntarily, "Hey, look over by the stove." First one and then another looked at Wes in guarded curiosity. In unison, they followed his gaze to the spot that held his attention. At once they all saw it. There in plain sight sat a quart jar of, you guessed it, Bama's famous best down-home apple butter. There sat the prize, the object of their affection. Each one of the apple butter hunters took a turn at meeting the other's gaze. Like a pack of hounds in a circle around a single object of prey, each of them wanted the prize, but they all knew that the first that would get there would be at the bottom of the pile of all the scavengers. Just as they were about to make a concerted leap toward that jar, it was no longer there because Wes had measured the situation and had correctly deduced that while the others were looking at each other, he had a small window of time to make his solitary move. He slid under the table out of view, crawled swiftly to the jar, picked it up, and made a run for the door. He had almost made his break to the back door when Stoink the cat decided outside was where he needed to be as well. Well, maybe Stoink was fearful of the impending clash about to be wrought concerning the mysterious jar of brown goo. Maybe he just needed to go out and do his business, and he chose a most inopportune time to do it. Whatever the reason, Stoink crossed in Wes's path, and in so doing had the misfortune of taking a fast-moving foot to the rear from Wes, who had just reached escape velocity. The back door was unexpectedly opened, and the cat executed a beautiful swan dive, sailing in a high arc through the door, remaining completely airborne over the back porch and coming down to a perfect 4-point landing about a foot beyond the back porch steps. The back door happened to be open because Daddy had gone outside to talk about the loan of one of his red-bone hunting dogs to a visitor. He was on his way back in at the moment, and Stoink the cat took flight through the open doorway. He watched in awe as the cat completed his maiden voyage, accompanied with all the screaming cat sounds effects one might expect from a neurotic feline. Stoink must have thought he had become a pioneer in some sort of new evil cat-tossing event being tested out for the Olympics. While the cat-related portion of this drama was ending, the original pool boy part of the drama was just gaining steam. Wes, who, having initiated the cat flight, was now on his way to becoming a heap on the floor after succumbing to a brilliant open field tackle given by Stoink's fuzzy feline frame. To minimize the effect of a hard crash to the floor, Wes inadvertently let the jar of apple butter loose from his grip. Like the cat, the apple butter jar went airborne. The difference being that this time, Daddy caught the jar in his big right hand in mid-flight. Wes was not as fortunate, and as expected, he landed face down on the floor. As he skidded to a stop, he was joined by a pile of brothers who were chasing close behind. After dutifully frisking Wes, they determined that he no longer had the booty. Looking around, they soon discovered that Daddy was standing over them, projecting his classic disapproving stare. In his hand, he held the jar. Daddy said, "I'm going to put this jar in the middle of the table. None of you boys will take any of it until breakfast. Is that understood?" It was understood. The indignity of having apple butter on the premises, knowing where it was, but not being able to get it, made for a long evening and an even longer wait for breakfast time to arrive. While the apple butter served to divide at first, it eventually helped bring the team closer together, as a wave of sharing visited upon each. That was a particularly good thing given the anxiety that might rightly have fallen them. It's not every day you find a lost parcel with German lettering all over it. It's not every day that you wrestle with a tarp in a chicken house and come out of it a winner. It's definitely not every day that you see magic in its purest form, flying boxes with power over chicken poop. Who would have thought it? The boys might have asked, "What's next?" During the nightly drift off to sleep conversations, the decision came that in the morning they would share in the apple butter as a team, just as they would approach the box as a team. They would look forward with an expectation of understanding as together they reckoned what purpose their actions might have in their lives. As he lay on his side in his bed that night, Jay looked out the window that was only inches from his face. His sideways view of the yard outside included a partial view of the chicken house about 75 feet away. He drifted off to sleep with no particular concern for the syncopated waves of colored light emanating from the ordinarily darkened chicken house. Tomorrow, he thought to himself, tomorrow we will know your secret. As the sun broke over the railroad tracks, Wayne was first to recognize its coming. A new day with new revelations was out there waiting to be enjoyed. He vaulted over his two bedmates, younger brothers Richard and Lyndon. They were considered too young for the box adventure and the serious deportment that it required. In the bed, though, next to his, Wayne saw that Wes and Jay were still hard at work sawing logs. Wes's sleep sounds could more accurately be described as a chainsaw through barbed wire. He was not a quiet sleeper. "Get up, you two," Wayne said. "We got apple butter to eat and magic boxes to explore. Come on, get on up." Jay was still lying in the same position as when he drifted off to sleep the night before. As he opened his eyes in response to Wayne's admonition, he could still see the corner of the chicken house. No lights were visible. Did he imagine it? In no time, all the family breakfast assembly was complete as the boys filled their assigned seats. As usual, nobody dared to reach for any food until Mama and the girls had been seated. And then 2 more steps left. Daddy had to say the blessing first, and then he had to be served. Planer mill foremen need to arrive at work earlier than the mill hands for 2 reasons. First, to keep track of who came to work, and second, to set up and turn on all the milling equipment for the 7:30 a.m. start time. At last, all were seated. Daddy offered up the blessing for the hot, steaming, odoriferous breakfast before us. Mouths began to water, and Daddy's words were lost on the 5 knothead boys. They were capable of entertaining only one thought at a time. Their one thought was spent on a mental picture of how good one of those biscuits was going to be with that big old jar of apple butter. The jar, by the way, was strategically placed right in the middle of the spread of cathead biscuits, milk gravy, dry salt, bacon, and eggs. Whew. The blessing came to an end. That phase of the waiting period was finished. Daddy was going slow for some reason. Maybe he was running early and he enjoyed the luxury of taking his time to fill his plate. Maybe he just wanted to prolong the punishment for last night's backdoor disturbance. Whatever was in his mind, the result was this. The boys were beginning to feel hunger lust-worthy of a starving third world country. The situation had reached critical stage. "All right, boys, I want you to wait until your mother and your sisters have had a turn before you touch that apple butter. When they are done, you may begin, and you must take turns by age. Youngest first. Do you all understand me?" Daddy said. A collective, if not enthusiastic affirmative was returned by the boys. Wayne was satisfied with his pronouncement. Being the middle child of 5 boys, his status was the same either way. His only concern was whether the younger boys would be slow, naturally as Daddy was, on purpose. The moment arrived. To lend some civility to the situation, Daddy had instructed the boys to get themselves ready by securing and preparing a biscuit of choice. The ploy was designed specifically to minimize the ensuing chaos certain to occur if the boys were left to initiate what probably would resemble a shotgun start at a fishing tournament. Mama, ever the caretaker, passed on her turn and handed the jar to Wilma. Wilma followed Mama's example and passed the unopened jar to Janice. Not to be outdone, Janice handed the jar to Lyndon. Finally, the jar was in the grasp of the boys. Soon they would taste that unmistakable brown cooked goodness of apple mush laced with a generous helping of cinnamon and sugar. The youngest child in any family is very often referred to as the baby of the family. This was Lyndon's lot. The baby of the family enjoys certain benefits not afforded the other siblings. Of course, with benefits come responsibilities. For instance, you may get first dibs when the apple butter is doled out. But when the baby has 4 hungry apple butter junkie brothers watching his every move, he can get a little jumpy. Lyndon steadied the jar under his right arm like a running back protecting a football. He began to twist the lid, applying as much force as his little hand would allow. No luck. He began again, this time using his whole body as leverage. Wes started to laugh first and then was quickly joined by the others at the sight of Lyndon working so hard to open the lid on that new jar. The boys momentarily forgot about their hunger lust as they reached guffaw level thanks to little Lyndon's muscleman display. Wayne, like the others, had his biscuit buttered and ready to take his turn with that jar. He absent-mindedly took a bite out of the biscuit, and it was so good he took another. Still busy laughing at Lyndon's troubles, Wayne forgot to adjust his biscuit in hand after that first yummy bite. That explains why he bit his own finger. It may or may not explain what followed. Wayne's pain presented itself in the form of a violent scream, jerk, and flip maneuver. Taken separately, they might not have come to any consequence. Taken together, the ensuing chain reaction could easily have been predicted. Wayne's biscuit went airborne and bounced with a thunk against Richard's forehead. From there it careened in a new direction, back towards the table. The biscuit continued on rolling and hopping its way across just as the biscuit was about to find the table's ledge. Lyndon, now tired out with his energy reserve spent, set the jar down. There it was, sitting precariously on the edge, right in line with the incoming biscuit missile. The older 4 boys reacted at the same time, reaching for the prize, hoping to save it from an early demise. Though it was a valiant effort, they managed only to cancel each other out. The evidence of this was in the twisted pile of youthful humanity was forming right on top of the table. Mama, who had started the dishwashing process, had her back to most of this drama and was not privy to the climatic scene behind her. She heard a collective gasp laced with a few mumbled mild expletives, followed by the unmistakable sound of a glass jar with a full load of apple butter crashing onto the floor. Janice and Wilma looked at Mama with innocent faces, indicating that none of this was their doing. On the floor, Mama saw the starburst pattern of a brown glop that sparkled prettily as it centered thanks to a random arrangement of broken glass shards. The boys brought their gaze slowly upward to finally meet the eyes of Mama. She said nothing, at least not verbally. What she did do was place the knuckles of her dishwater wet hands on her hips and stare. It only lasted a few seconds, but then came the look that could last you a lifetime. Mama's eyebrows were bilingual. One raised eyebrow would likely mean, "More input, please. I don't quite understand the situation before me." If the look showed one brow up and one brow down, it translated loosely to, "You need to retain the services of a good lawyer." That double brow look was hanging there like an ominous black cloud over the boys, even as they continued to reach out for the prize now gone. Breakfast was over. The punishment was done. The boys had finished cleaning up the mess, all of it, before they realized the biggest punishment was still to come. However, self-inflicted, there would be no apple butter on the table for at least 2 weeks. With one biscuit in each hand, the boys went out to meet the day. Ordinarily, every sunrise at the pool house was punctuated with the sound of singing birds, barking dogs, clucking chickens, and the occasional pitiful meowing of a milk-starved cat. The pool boys paid little attention to any of that on this morning of mornings, nor did they notice the missing clucking component that was usually part of the morning serenade. Their goal for the day was to make sense out of the box now hidden in their structurally unsound chicken house. With characteristic leadership acquired or assumed due to the birth rank, Jay brought the group into a huddle and they stood outside the chicken house door. "Let's plan what to do next." The boys faced one another in a three-cornered circle. Suddenly there was a fourth corner, and his name was Leon. He had planted himself a respectable distance away from the chicken house as he waited for the boys to show up. Leon's fearful respect for the powers unknown likely caused him to put caution and a cushion between him and the haunted chicken house. No longer alone, he found the confidence to speak. "Well, we gonna go in there and get that box?" Leon asked, a little tentatively. "No, we are not," said Jay, a little more forcefully than he intended. "Wes and I'll go in first, and you and Wayne will stay outside the entrance here and be lookouts. Do you understand me, Leon?" "I understand," said Wayne. "I ain't no hurry to see that thing just yet." "Me neither," said Leon. With that, Jay and Wes approached the chicken house entrance. Without resistance and a lot of trepidation, Wayne and Leon took their assigned positions. Like Roman centurions, they stood guard at the gate of the chicken house. It was now the home of the mysterious box. Immediately, they began to scan the horizon, or at least the chicken yard and beyond as far as the road. Woe be it to any robbers, claim jumpers, or any other villainous feller who might dare to cause trouble on their watch. Jay led the way as he and Wes entered the chicken house. Once inside, Jay said, "Hey, Wes, you notice anything odd?" After a quick quizzical survey of the chicken house, Wes said, "No, what are you talking about?" "Chickens," said Jay. "Where are the chickens?" "I don't know. Now that I think about it, I ain't heard 'em all morning." Jay turned his gaze toward the box. A side panel opened, and a chicken came waddling out. Then came another, and another. They continued to come out one at a time until all 30 or so pool chickens were accounted for. The long list of oddities and questions raised by this box continued to grow. Case in point, how did all those chickens fit in that box? And how could they believe what they saw as each chicken exited the box? You see, it appeared that each chicken grew from tiny to normal size just as they passed through the open panel. The chickens, like a squad of well-trained soldiers, marched to their assigned roosting positions and remained there as if they were waiting for further orders from their leader. What seemed most unusual about this chicken maneuver was the direction that they were facing. Ordinarily, they perched on the roost facing toward the next rung below. This time, they were facing the rung above. The boys were only slightly surprised to see the chickens, all of them, with beaks pointed directly toward the box. Pondering this phenomenon, the usually passive Wes unintentionally out loud, "I wonder what'd happen if I stuck my hand in that hole." "I don't know, Wes. Why don't you give it a try?" said Jay. Wes had startled himself with his own voice and looked at Jay as if he must have been some kind of mind reader. After the usual, "I will if you will" banter had run its course, they mutually agreed to give it a try on some future date, or specifically, never. It didn't really matter because during their heated "I dare you" exchange, the panel or hold had closed up, leaving no evidence of ever having been there. Seeing this, the boys resumed suspended disbelief and returned their focus to the original task. Jay and Wes slowly eased back outside to rejoin Wayne and Leon to consider their next move. "What's up, guys? What we doing now?" asked Wayne. In response, Jay and Wes looked at each other and gave a knowing nod and a simultaneous shrug of the shoulders. They were not eager to share whatever they saw or thought they saw, and with that, Jay changed the subject. "Wes, do you remember how we got the box in here last night?" Jay asked. "Sure," said Wes. "We didn't do nothing. It kind of went in there on its own." "That's right. We need to figure out what we did to get that box to do that," said Jay. Jay used a phrase he had heard one of his teachers use as a teaching learning tool. He said to the others, "Let's review. If we talk through what all we did, maybe it'll come to us what happened to get that box a moving." Jay studied the faces of the other boys, looking for clues or suggestions as to how to proceed. Jay's gaze went from Wes to Wayne and then to Leon, who responded with the same blank stare and shoulder shrug as the other boys. They couldn't afford to make any mistakes that might draw attention to them or this project. Finally, it was Leon who spoke and said, "Man, I just wish we could remember what we did." All three pool boys looked at Leon, and in unison they said, "Leon, that's it! That's it!" With obvious confusion, Leon said, "What's it?" Jay spoke for the others. "Leon, don't you remember? You said, 'I wish this thing would go in the chicken house by itself,' and it did." Leon smiled real big and said, "Hey, that's right. I said that. I did that. What you said." So proud was he to have done something positive for this project that he became a little tongue-tied in his response. Jay spoke to the group. "You all know what this means, don't you? It means Leon is our box talker. The box must have tuned itself into Leon's voice. If we need to have it to do something, Leon has to give the order." Now, Leon might not have been a great student in school, but maybe he was a little lacking in social skills. You might say his command of the King's English was limited mostly to single-syllable words, the bulk of which were not suitable for the family conversation. One thing you could not question was his strong sense of self-preservation. From Leon's point of view, the mantle of power had suddenly been put on his shoulders. Recognizing this situation, Leon was quick to test his new authority. He said, "You mean to tell me I'm in charge of getting the box to do whatever it is that we want it to do?" "That's pretty much right," said Jay. "You need to understand that it's kind of like this. You will be the gun, but it takes all of us to decide when to pull that trigger." At first, Leon got lost in that explanation. He finally decided correctly that it meant probably that the use of his new power was constrained by the decisions of the others as to the time and place. That seemed to satisfy Leon. It took away from some of the responsibility that comes with the power. On the upside, it confirmed him to be a bona fide member of this group. The rules were set. The time had come to test the group process of Jay to Leon to Box. That being too long of a name, the boys simply called it the Leon deal. Wayne was getting antsy to do something, and he said, "Hey, when are we going to try out the Leon deal?" Jay said, "Calm down, Wayne." Then to Leon, he said, "All right, Leon, here's what we're going to do. You and I will enter the chicken house. You will look directly at the box, and using your outside voice, you will say, 'Rise up, Box.'" Up to now, Leon was unaware that he possessed more than one voice, and he was about to say so to Jay. He became so unnerved at this point, the possibility that a voice other than his own, possibly that of some haint that his folks had spoken of, made him temporarily unable to speak at all. That explained the quizzical look he flashed towards Jay, who recognized Leon's hesitation for what it was. Jay quickly calmed his fears. "Leon, I just mean to say the command with forceful self-assurance of a true leader." Leon considered Jay's words. As far as he knew, he had never even possessed the forcefulness or self-assurance. He didn't even know what that second thing was. Jay continued with his instructions to Leon. "And if that works, then you will say, 'Follow me, Box.' You understand, Leon?" Leon solved his own problem by simply saying, "Jay, you just tell me what and tell me when, and I'll try to do it." "Good enough for me. Are you ready?" asked Jay. Leon nodded nervously in the affirmative. As they approached the doorway of the chicken house, they walked side by side. As each step brought them nearer, Leon's pace slackened until he was directly behind Jay when they entered the doorway. "Now remember, Leon, say, 'Rise up, Box,' and say it nice and strong." Leon found some tiny bit of courage as he eased around Jay just far enough to where he could see the box. Leon cleared his throat and took in a large gulp of air. His voice was almost a whisper when he spoke, though. "Rise up, Box." The box only moved slightly. It reminded Leon of a sleeping dog's reaction when you poke at it with a stick. Not that he'd ever poked a sleeping dog with a stick, but anyway. Leon gained courage from the box's response. "I said, rise up, Box." He startled himself when his own voice was way too loud, this time, even to his own estimation. The box reacted much more noticeably. First came a low rumble. Then the rumble rapidly increased in its intensity. The chickens began to flutter their wings in protest. It was not apparent whether their distress was due to the rumble of the box or to the bellowing rascal whose voice set off the rumble. The result was that the box did in fact rise up. It rose slowly upward until Jay saw that it was in immediate need of another command, or else it was about to make a big square hole in the roof of the not-so-stable chicken house structure. Having no previous experience with such things as the timing and content and appropriate verbalization of commands to a magical box, Jay went for the basics and hurriedly fed Leon the next command. "Leon, say, 'Stop, Box!'" Leon was letting the situation get to him a little bit as his newfound courage began to wane. "Leon, come on and say it. Say, 'Stop, Box!'" Leon finally sputtered out the words, "Stop, Box!" The box responded and stopped just as it began to lift up the scraps of tin that served as a roof over the chicken house. Several nails that held the tin in place were pulled almost out of their old pine rafters. Wes and Wayne temporarily abandoned their guard duty and ventured just close enough to peek in the chicken house door. They wanted to see what the commotion was all about, but not so badly as to get too close. They were transfixed on the airborne object at the top of the chicken house. Now, since the box seemed to be waiting for a new command, it gave Jay a moment to decide what that command would be. He decided that commands of a specific nature with finite boundaries of execution were the safest way to go. Jay said to Leon, "Tell it to come down slow and stop just above the chicken house floor." Leon passed on the instruction, and the box immediately complied by slowly dropping the 4 or 5 feet to its appointed position. As it came to rest again, a sound came from the old roof, a screeching sound that could only be coming from one thing. Metal nails were contacting and passing through the wood. The boys looked up to see the detached tin roofing come to rest in its original position as the nails refastened themselves to the rafters. momentarily shaking off this event, which was just one more in an increasingly long list of amazing and almost unbelievable quirky events. Jay spoke again to Leon. Leon, we need to get this thing out of the chicken house and move it to some place where we can study on it in secret. Do you understand? Leon nodded. Sure, I understand, but where's a place like that? Having already had this problem weighing on his mind, Wayne spoke from his position outside the door looking in. How about down by Messamore's Pond? We go down there a lot and nobody but the Johnson kids ever come around. The Johnson kids were from a black family who were only slightly poorer than we were. Like us, they entertained themselves as best they could with whatever was available. The notion of the two groups playing together was generally frowned upon, if not totally unthinkable. However, there was the occasional chance meetings at the pond, which served as a swimming pool and a fishing hole quality equally to both white and black kids. The pond was built to be a watering hole for the several head of cattle owned by the Messamore family. Because of that, it wasn't really a very pleasant place to play, let alone swim in it. As long as you stayed afloat, it was okay, but if you chanced to stand up in the pond, your feet would tell you right away that the squishy bottom of the pond was the final resting place of what the cows had for dinner. Ugh. As a rule, the pond etiquette dictated that if we were at the pond when the Johnsons came up, it'd be on us to leave it to them. If they were there first, it'd be on them to move out. Sometimes it was not clear who had arrived first. In those occasions, a careful coexistence ensued, with each faction making use of a different portion of the pond. Disputes were few, and even then never serious. Messamore's Pond, you say? Said Jay, repeating Wayne's suggestion. You know, that could work. We'll need to take a few tools. If everyone agrees, we'll feed the needed instructions to Leon to get that box going. Wayne and Wes said, hey, let's do it. Leon hesitated only because he forgot that he even had voting powers. Finally, he said, yeah, let's go. With the voting done and the unanimous decision being made to move the venue to Messamore's Pond, Jay was determined to pick the next commands carefully. Next destination, Messamore's Pond. Jay held Leon by the ears. Not to threaten or to maim, but to assure himself that he had Leon's full attention. Leon, I want you to listen to me really good. This trip down to the pond is going to be very tricky, and I need you to focus really hard on the box and how we get it to move. You understand, Leon? Leon pondered these words without any visible response. Leon! Jay almost yelled. He had to know that Leon was up to the task. Like a dark cloud breaking to let in the sun, Leon's face finally began to report a clearer solution now forming in his mind. As Leon spoke, I can do it, Jay. Jay, I can do it. Mentoring his younger brothers was not a new concept to Jay. Mentoring someone outside the family was definitely new territory. Jay released Leon from his grasp and gave him a tentative pat on the back before giving a set of instructions to him to pass on to the box. Leon, said Jay, I think we should take it slow at first so we can get an idea of how to control the box. Let's try 2 instructions at a time. After that, maybe we can try 3 or maybe more. Okay, Jay, tell me what to start with, said Leon. With that, Jay set the bar low with 2 simple instructions. Jay said, say to the box, rise up 6 inches from the floor and stop. You got it, Leon? Leon nodded, his understanding to Jay, turned toward the box, and with a remarkably steady voice, he cautiously relayed verbatim Jay's intentions for the box, and the box responded. This time, there was no rumble, no flashing lights, no ceremony, just a very large wooden shipping crate rising up with total disregard for the law of gravity. As directed, the box maintained its position just 6 inches from the chicken house floor. Okay, Leon, Tell it to move to the chicken house door and stop. But before you say it, make sure you are out of the door before it gets there, because we don't want you to get blocked in." "Okay, Jay," said Leon. Leon headed for the door. Too much time had passed before Leon was ready to relay the next instruction. Over his shoulder, he said, "Box, come over here." Seeing his mistake, Leon said, "Box, come toward me. No, wait, follow me. Oh, no." Before Jay could repeat the instruction, Leon had reached the door, and the box followed on his heels. Wes and Wayne had tried to keep up with the things that were going on in the chicken house. That wasn't so easy. The chickens had been rather quiet up till then. Now they were in full throttle mode, having begun their morning clucking conversations. Wes and Wayne made out a little of Jay and Leon's interaction along the way, but they were surprised when Leon came toward them with the box following close behind. Wes and Wayne looked at each other questioningly, each expecting the other to know what was going on. Neither face presented an answer. Their collective response was random at best. Wayne was the most fleet of foot in a sprint race. He turned on his heels intending to make dust bubbles, which he did. Wes's reaction to both the happenings inside and the sudden lightning-fast departure of his little brother Wayne outside was simple: run. Turning to effect his getaway, Wes uttered one word that sounded somewhere between gack and lee. Wayne was fast, but Wes found fear to be a most effective motivator. He was only seconds behind Wayne as they reached the other side of the gravel road, some 20 yards from the chicken house door. They turned to see what was going to happen next. Even before they reached their place of safety across the road, Leon was making his cautious exit from the chicken house. Having botched the proven process of Jay to Leon and Leon to box instructions, Leon began to plead with Jay on what to say next. "Jay, what now? Tell me what to do," said Leon. Jay responded quickly, but not before the box bumped into Leon and knocked him on the ground just outside the chicken house door. Jay's words lingered in Leon's head and eventually reached his mouth. "Stop, box, stop," said Leon. The box stopped. Leon's timing was such that the box stopped just about an inch or so above his body. It hovered there with a peculiar sound emanating from within, a low machine-like humming sound, oscillating in time with a slight up and down floating on air motion of the box. It was though it was struggling, if only slightly, to maintain a safe distance above Leon. The box was waiting for more input. Wes and Wayne waited silently from the safety of the other side of the gravel road. They maintained a constant vigilance with eyes fixed on the chicken house doorway. They were ready to move even further away if time needed. They saw Leon emerge through the doorway. They saw the box coming out behind him. They heard him say, "Stop, box, stop." They saw the box bump in onto the ground and then hover like a magic carpet over the helpless, hapless Leon. They chose not to run. Jay squeezed out of the box of the chicken house behind the box to find Leon laying on the ground. The box was covering him. Across the road, Jay saw his two brothers who had set up a new sentry post from where to guard the premises. Jay yelled at Wes and Wayne, "Come back over here, you two!" Then to Leon, "Crawl out from underneath that box and quit horsing around, Leon." As the brothers made their way back to the chicken house, Leon righted himself and began the unproductive task of dusting off the most recent layer of dirt and grime on his breeches. Once again, the team was in a huddle. Accusations were exchanged and various degrees of blame were laid. Jay ended the discussion by saying, "Enough. We're all in this together, so we can all claim ownership of whatever happens, good or bad." With that, the discussion turned back to Miss Moore's pond. Jay continued, "Leon, you must take care to repeat my commands to the box exactly as I say them, even if you don't understand why I'm saying them." Leon nodded in agreement, mostly to the part where he probably wouldn't understand. Wes and Wayne I think you two will be the best at running interference for us. Wes said, "What's that mean, Jay?" Jay said, "It means you two go a little ahead of us and to the sides of us and watch out for anyone that might give us any trouble. Always stay within eyesight of us and the box. If you see someone, you come quietly and quickly back to where you are to let us know. Does that explain it okay?" Wes said he got it. "Okay, I figure here is the overall plan to get us there," said Jay. He was beginning to sound like a general laying out another big battle plan. "We'll go around behind the chicken house, pass by the dog pen, move on to the first barbed wire and stop. We'll need to figure out then what the best way to get past the fence. If it works okay, we can do it again at the second fence." The time had come to strike out toward the pond. Jay began with the first instruction to Leon, who dutifully passed it on to the box. As Jay had outlined, they moved in unison, the box included, to a position behind the chicken house. Another instruction followed, and they were soon alongside the dog pen. Buck, the hand-biting dog, growled menacingly as the group came to rest in a position that was seen by Buck as an obvious breach of territorial etiquette. Buck continued his snarl and best low grumbling guttural growl. The box was not impressed and returned a message to Buck as it rumbled and shook and vibrated fiercely. It suddenly stopped and in doing so emitted a thunderous cracking sound, not unlike the report of a bullwhip. Buck was impressed so much that he literally turned tail and ran. Wes could not have enjoyed that moment any more. Oddly, the box's rebuff of Buck's did not startle or scare Wes in the least. He was too deeply dipped in the sweet waters of revenge to have been bothered by its source. Buck peered around the corner of his doghouse and remained there until the boys moved on. Things were going pretty smooth with the box transport. They made it along the dog pen and were well on the way across the field behind it. The first real physical hurdle lay straight ahead. In sight was the first of 2 3-strand barbed wire fences that served to contain the Messamore cattle. The proper negotiation of this barrier was a need well recognized by all in the group, but no one yet had offered a solution. Leon continued to occasionally repeat the command given by Jay. "Keep following me, Box. Just keep following me." The box did just that. "What are we going to do when we get to the fence?" asked Leon. "Don't know yet. Probably just tell the box to rise, stop, move forward, then lower to the ground. We'll see when we get there." Wes and Wayne, as ordered, had advanced ahead of Jay, Leon, and the box. They had nothing to report so far relative to any intruders or anything. When they reached the fence, they studied it for the most forgiving of places regarding ease of passage. They found one spot where the fence posts were further separated than the others. This would allow the wire to be parted farther above and below them, and they leaned over enough to crawl through. As fortune would have it, one of the posts had a missing staple, making it even easier to pass through. They should have already known about this spot, but one of many times they've made this trip to the pond, not once were they accompanied by a very large wooden box. They stood at each post and waited for Jay and Leon and the box to catch up. Wes and Wayne shared a moment of prideful rhetoric as they waited for Jay and Leon to arrive. Wes said, "Wayne, we are getting pretty good at this Centurion Guard stuff, don't you think?" Wayne said, "Well, I reckon we are. I don't know any other Centurion Guard, so I suppose we're the best there is." Wes nodded in agreement. Moments later, the box and its attendants approached the fence squarely between the positions held by the Centurions, Wes and Wayne. Just as it reached the wire boundary, the command came. Jay said, "Box, stop 6 inches from the fence wire." Leon's level of confidence increased with each bit of forward progress. He summoned all his newly found authority and relayed the command to the box, and the box responded perfectly. The team of 4, were once again huddled around the box. Wes explained the positive aspects of the place that he and Wayne had chosen. It boasted the wide separation between the posts, the loosened staples, and the pre-stretched nature of the wire. Taken together, all of this made it the most optimum crossing point. Jay agreed. Leon agreed too, but he wasn't sure why. Rabbit head. Jay said, "Okay, guys, test the fence to see what kind of room we can get between the wires. If it's wide enough, we can pass the box through. If not, we will need to coax the box high enough to pass it over the fence." Wes and Wayne dutifully took their positions at the fence. With one foot on the lower wire and two-fisted grip on the second wire, they pulled up and pushed down in unison to present the largest possible opening their small frames would afford. The space appeared to be large enough for the box, but they could only hold the opening for a short time. Wes lost his grip on the upper wire first. While he was smaller, Wayne yielded to no one easily. He held his position as long as he could before the upper wire slipped from his hand too. They both held a foot on the bottom wire. They should have tried harder to coordinate the next move as they looked at each other in a manner that would presume commonality of thought. Such was not the case. Wes let his left foot slip off the wire before Wayne was ready. The tension returned the wire swiftly to the natural state of rest. The next effect was a release of energy that was transmitted to Wayne's foot. Wayne was lifted off the ground by the recoiling wire. He went airborne momentarily before finding his own state of rest, as it happened to be sitting right upright on a fresh cow patty. Poop. More cow poop. Wes could complain of a painful throbbing in his hands, but he didn't. He knew Wayne had the same problem, plus the added indignity of having to eventually return home with the unmistakable scent of cow poop emanating from his backside. Wes got up and offered a hand to Wayne to help him right up. A muffled snicker began to surface from the general direction of Leon. That first little chortle set off a chain reaction so that Leon, Jay, and even Wes were laughing hard. All of this was, of course, at the expense of little old Wayne and his fast-departing dignity. Soon enough, Wayne himself found a little humor in this moment, and he too began to laugh. The others laughed so hard they were nearly choked on their own spit. That's when Wayne waddled over to the nearest patch of grass and started scooting on his bottom. That's when Wayne waddled over to the nearest patch of grass and started scooting his bottom over the ground like a dog on a rug. The others tried feebly to contain themselves without success. Wayne's scooting performance caused them to scream and even harder with laughter as they rolled around helplessly on the loose dirt and patchy grass. They now had the presence of mind to steer clear of the offending piles of bovine byproduct. Jay finally brought the whole thing to an end when he said, Hey, we better quieten down. We don't want to attract any attention." He said this as he pointed toward the box. Too late. Someone did hear him. Johnny Baker and Leon's older brother, Jocus, heard the ruckus. They had been taking turns shooting Johnny's BB gun at whatever came into their sights down by the edge of Messamore's pond. Jocus and Johnny looked at each other and then turned to look back in the direction of the laughter. They couldn't see anything since the sound came from over the hill. "It's them pool boys," said Jocus. Let's go up there and give them a scare for laughing at us. You got plenty of BBs, Johnny?" Johnny answered by patting his pant leg, which contained a paper tube with enough BBs to sound like a rattlesnake with every step he took. Back at the fence, Jay was trying to settle the gang down long enough to proceed with the box in tow. "Leon, are you ready to do your magic?" asked Jay. The blank stare that often visited Leon's face had returned. Leon's only experience with magic was the black magic that his family took very seriously because of their beliefs in the ghosts and the haints and the such. Leon broke his stare and asked, "What magic you talking about there, Jay?" Jay quickly calmed Leon by saying, "I'm just talking about the box and the way it follows your voice commands." Jay quickly calmed Leon. "All that," he said. He was noticeably relieved. "Yeah, let's get on moving down there toward the pond." After some study and a few rudimentary calculations, Jay announced that their only recourse was to cause the box to pass over the wires, then rather push through them. All agreed, including Wayne, who was in no hurry to repeat his flip-flop-sop-flop scoot maneuver. They set up for the task commanding the box to move. They were completely unaware that they were soon to be confronted by Jocus and Johnny. Leon was very carefully navigated his way between the strands of barbed wire. He had felt the sting of one of those barbs before. He would not be hesitant to admit he did not like it. This time he got to the other side of the fence without incident. Jay stayed with the box just opposite where Leon stood. Wes and Wayne moved forward a little toward the pond to reestablish their roles as the Centurion outlooks. Wayne set the pace as he still found it difficult to walk normally with cow pasture plaster drying on his backside. They could see all the way to the pond and saw nothing out of the ordinary. Wayne kept looking while Wes turned to report their findings. "All clear down here, Jay," Wes sing-songingly called out. He was a little proud of himself for forming a rhyme with his words. They didn't see anything to report because Jocus and Johnny had cleverly circled around and away from the source of the ruckus laughter they sought to investigate. Given the go-ahead signal, Jay spoke to Leon. "Okay, Leon, you've got to take your time with this maneuver because it's going to be a little bit more complicated than we've done so far." Leon tilted his head to the left and then to the right, much like a dog does when you say something they don't quite understand. Jay read his expression and said, "Leon, it's going to be harder, so you have to go slow." Leon got it that time and nodded to show it. At this point, Jocus and Johnny had reached a point where they could see all that was going on. Whether or not they believed what they saw was a different matter. Jay said, "All right, Leon, say, box, raise straight up 5 feet." Leon relayed the instruction word for word. With a minor rumble and a shimmy shake of the box, it slowly rose up to the appointed height. "Leon," Jay continued, "say, box, come forward toward me 6 feet again." Again, Leon repeated the words, and the box moved as directed. At this point in the process, the unexpected began to happen. Wes yelled, "Hey, Jay! There's somebody down there watching us." Wes pointed in the direction of Jocus and Johnny. He could not tell who it was at this point, so he didn't know if they were friend or foe. Jay looked, but he couldn't see them over the rise, so he knew fast action was required. Jocus and Johnny didn't know whether to be amazed or to be scared silly from what they had just seen. Having been spotted, they decided to approach cautiously. Jay reacted quickly. "Leon, tell the box to set down slowly to the ground." Leon wasn't blessed with the same calm reserve as Jay in situations like this. The pressure of being the communicator to the box and the fear of unknown assassins looming just on the overside of the hill weighed very heavily on him. As much as he wanted to bolt toward home, Leon somehow held his ground. While Wes and Wayne loped over high grasses to the fence as they could, Leon relayed Jay's last command. He said, "Box, drop!" The box responded with a free fall to the ground. The impact was hard enough to knock both Jay and Leon off their feet. Once the box landed, a huge boil of dust rose up all around it. The dust began to whirl around the box. Jay moved down a couple of fence posts to pass it over to the other side. Leon was moving backward in the general direction of the pond as fast as Wes and Wayne were running away from it. Jay got close enough to the box to feel the dust air moving around it with ever-increasing speed. The big old box began to move towards Leon. Jay hollered at Leon, Slow down, Leon. It's trying to follow you. It's not going to hurt you. Leon slowed down for a minute, and the box did too. The dust continued to increase to the point that the box could not be seen. Jocus and Johnny were pretty sure they had seen all this strange activity, but neither could bring it to himself to be the first to confess it. Jocus said to Johnny, "Did you see? Did I just... Did we?" He couldn't bring himself to speak all the words out loud. Jocus and Johnny were dumbstruck at what they had just seen. Was there really a curious dusty whirlwind spiraling around a great big wooden box? Was that box floating in midair? Could Leon have suddenly acquired a special power that afforded him the wherewithal to order the box to drop? Was the box trying to hide inside this whirlwind? "I can't move my feet," they both squealed so loud that neither could tell for sure if it was their own voice they heard. As hard as they tried not to believe it, their first reaction was to move without delay in a decidedly opposite direction. The problem with that was a small case of mass hysteria that settled upon the two of them, causing a bad case of sudden sticky feet syndrome. Neither could manage disbelief of this experience. If you tack on that, along with their common lack of mobility, they were totally powerless to do anything but watch. "We gots to get out of here," said Jocus. "But I can't move," said Johnny. He was beginning to blubber unintelligibly. What strange power had been visited upon them? Neither of them understood what their eyes told their brain. Jay, Wes, Wayne, and Leon were standing in different positions around the whirling dust cloud. "Well, they've seen us. What are we going to do about them?" Jay yelled over the roar of the wind. Leon was in sight of Jay, but Wes and Wayne were not. Leon could see Wayne, who in turn could see Wes. Jay spoke again. "Everybody, come over to where I am between the box and those two goobers up there watching us." "Hey, one of them goobers is my brother," Leon protested. "Well, you're right, Leon. I shouldn't call him a goober. How about if I just call him a yahoo?" said Jay. Leon allowed as how that was some better, but he wasn't clear on by how much. After Leon passed on the message to Wayne, who in turn passed it on to Wes, the foursome congregated in the spot prescribed. Jay spoke. "Okay, guys, what is our next move? Anybody think we should challenge them and make them go away? Do we just ignore them and hope the word don't get out? Do you think we ought to let them in on this deal?" Wayne was always up for a fight, even if the prospects for a favorable outcome were not a lock. "I say we go down there and whoop 'em," said Wayne. "Well, now I admire your courage, Wayne," said Jay, "but even if we could beat them, they would surely cause us a lot of trouble later." "Yeah, probably so. But we got to do something or they'll mess everything up," said Wayne. His enthusiasm for a fight was now on the ebb. Having suffered aplenty at the hands of Jocus by just living with him in the same roof, Leon had no wish to confront his brother, even if it was 4 against 2. The wise one, Wes, spoke. "Well, looks like we might have to bring in some new partners." "Does everyone agree?" asked Jay. He polled each member of the group with eye contact. Wes and Leon agreed with an affirmative nod that bringing them in was probably the least destructive resolution. Wayne was a holdout. He purposefully avoided eye contact with Jay. "Come on, Wayne, don't you want to make it unanimous?" Jay said. Wayne made eye contact just long enough to show Jay that he probably didn't know what unanimous meant. "Now, do you want to make the vote 4 out of 4 in favor of letting Jocus and Johnny in the group?" Jay asked patiently. Wayne said, "Well, when you put it that way, I guess I do want to make it unanimous." The votes had been cast, and the measure had been passed. Jay laid out a quick outline of what must happen now. First, a deal must be struck by the negotiating with Jocus and Johnny concerning their level of participation. Among other things, we need to explain to them what we have found and
what our experience has been up to this point. We need to explain that this box has some sort of powers beyond our understanding. They need to know that great care and caution must be used in our dealings. Agreed? Everyone agreed. Okay, Leon, we need to command the box to let Jocus and Johnny free, but not before we talk to them. Let's go over there where they are and introduce them to the box. Following Jay's lead, the others moved slowly in the direction of the intruders. Wes and Wayne aligned themselves directly behind Jay, with Leon bringing up the rear from slightly safer distance behind them. As the gang of four approached the paralyzed two, the fear exhibited in the faces of Jocus and Johnny was pure and absolute. If they could speak, they would have said as much, but they couldn't even speak. Such was the power of the box over them. Jay spoke to them. "Hello, Jocus. Hello, Johnny. You guys doing all right?" Jay decided a calm and even-tempered approach would work the best as he eased into the subject of the box. Jocus and Johnny gave a muffled grunt and an almost imperceptible nod. Jay continued, "I'll take that as a positive response. What have you guys been up to today? See anything out of the ordinary?" This brought out another even louder grunt and a distant change in the coloration on Jocus's face. Jocus would obviously be the spokesman for the two. Unfortunately, he was still unable to speak, just grunt. "What's that you say, Jocus?" asked Jay. "You say you saw something?" Jay was on the verge of taunting when he finally asked, "Do you want to talk?" Jocus and Johnny managed to communicate an affirmative reply. "All right, then," said Jay, "but your first words must be to tell us exactly what you saw and heard. Are you agreeable to that?" Another affirmative-like grunt came from both Jocus and Johnny. Jay spoke to Leon. "Go back over to the box and give it a command to let Jocus and Johnny speak, but tell the box to keep their feet frozen in place for the moment." Leon dutifully ran back toward the box. He got about halfway there and stopped. He worried about saying all of what Jay had told him to say. His worries were not unfounded, since his inability to retain large chunks of information was widely recognized. He couldn't recite the Pledge of Allegiance beyond the phrase "and to the Republic for which it stands," even though it was spoken at the beginning of each day at school. Let's see. I'm supposed to tell the box to... He was losing it. I'm supposed to say box? No, that's not right. Leon turned and looked back toward the group. They were all looking back at him. While Jocus and Johnny were looking in Leon's general direction, it was involuntary on their part. Jay gave a wave to Leon, trying to reassure him that he was doing okay and that he should go on and do what he was assigned to do. Jay said, "Okay, boys, be ready to be amazed, because you are about to see something you might find very difficult to believe, even after foreseeing it yourself." Leon turned back toward his goal, and every few steps he stopped long enough to glance back toward the waiting group. The farther he went, the less easy keeping them in sight became due to the rolling terrain. Leon was a fraidy cat by nature. He may have to be up there alone, but he could at least know by line of sight that his backup was still with him. Eventually, he reached a point where he could see both the box and see the others down the hill. The moment of truth had arrived. Leon prepared himself for the task at hand. To himself, Leon said, "Let's see. I need to tell the box to..." A wave of fear shot through his little body, and he realized he had lost track of the verbal script assigned to him by Jay. "Oh, no, I've forgotten," he said inwardly this time. He looked to the box. He looked back down the hill, back to the box. He was on the verge of tears when suddenly the box got his attention. He was defeated. His head was down, shoulders slumped forward, eyes were becoming wet, and his legs were crossed like someone who needed to visit a bathroom. This was the precise moment that the box took over. First the ground shook a little, and then an audible rumbling sound rippled the air. Leon raised his head with a whip and uttered a single sound. "Huh?"
he saw the dusty dirt around the box that was loosened from before as it began to ripple across the ground in unison with the accompanying rumbling sounds. Leon's posture began to change. He was somehow calmed by the sights and sounds offered to him by the box. His fear was gone. His posture improved, but most importantly, his memory returned. Leon spoke. "Box!" he yelled so that all could hear, including Jocus and Johnny. "Box, I need you to allow Johnny and Jocus to speak, but do not allow their feet to move." The box shuddered a bit, the dust settled, and Leon prepared to return to the others. "Box, I'll be back," Leon said by way of salutation to the box. With that, he was gone downhill in a cloud of dust of his own making. "Jay, how did I do?" asked Leon. Before Jay could tell him that he had done fine, Leon got his answer from Jocus, who was now very ready to speak. "What did you do, Leon? What in Sam Hill did you do?" blurted Jocus. Now, Jocus, remember your promise," said Jay. Jocus was struggling to reach out and grab Leon, but he couldn't because his feet were still stuck to the ground. Anxious to end the terror visited upon him and Johnny, Jocus turned to Jay and tried his best to describe what he had witnessed concerning that spooky big box. He told of dust tornadoes and of a big floating box and a brother that had conversations with the box. Before he could go further, Jay decided to let Jocus off the hook, so he stopped him in mid-ramble. "That's enough, Jocus," said Jay, speaking directly to Jocus and Johnny, but also to himself and the others. Jay reviewed all of what they had learned so far about the box and what was in it. He went on to tell them that Leon had been singled out for whatever reason by the box as its connection to the others. Jay explained how Leon could tell the box what to do and it would respond. Jocus was not impressed with this last bit of information. He could never imagine his brother Leon to be capable of intelligible discourse with anyone, let alone a mysterious, otherworldly type of being such as the one being presented to him now. Jocus said, "If Leon is so special, then why didn't he show me a sample of his newfound talent?" Leon looked at Jay. Jay nodded his head and said, "Well, show him, Leon." Leon looked at his other brother and, to his notion, somewhat meaner brother. Leon looked at Jocus's feet, which were still firmly affixed to the ground. Leon turned toward the box, which was still at rest up the hill. He looked at Jocus again and asked, "All right, which foot do you want to be loosened?" Jocus looked at his own feet. "Well, both of them," he said. "Sorry, you only get one," said Leon. Of course, Leon was acting in self-preservation mode, and as such was in no hurry to allow Jocus free access to him and his own spindly little carcass. "Okay, all right then. Free up my right foot," said Jocus. "Me too," said Johnny. "One step at a time," said Leon. He was unaware that he had played a fairly good pun in what he just said. "Okay, here goes," said Leon as he turned his full attention to the box. Since he couldn't see the box, Leon's first instruction was given to gain a better Leon-to-box visual connection. With a confidence and sureness unfamiliar to his older brother, Leon spoke toward the box. "Box," he said loudly, "rise up, above the ground, 3 feet. Leon's skills related to math and in particular geometry must have improved with his interaction with the box. All through this exercise up to this point, Wes and Wayne sort of huddled together behind older, bigger brother Jay. They were happy to remain quiet non-participants for this entire verbal exchange. Over the hill, suddenly the box came into view. Johnny was speechless and reacted by pulling on each leg, attempting to free himself from his stuck position. Jocus, on the other hand, made no attempt to move at all. He didn't know whether to watch the box or Leon. Leon spoke again. This time it was for Jocus. He gave the command, "Box, loosen my brother Jocus's right foot." He pointed to Jocus's right foot just to confirm his wish. The box rumbled a bit, and the dirt between the box and Jocus's right foot began to react. From near the box to a line straight as an arrow towards Jocus's right foot, the soil below began to erupt. Imagine if someone was pulling up a buried invisible wire. That's what it looked like. Bits of rocks and roots and grass were flying up in the air. It traveled like a lightning bolt, straight to the big toe of right foot of Jocus. Jocus had closed his eyes as soon as he saw whatever it was a-coming. By the time he realized it was over and he opened his eyes, and Jocus knew that Leon was now his superior. "What do you think?" said Leon. Jocus was busy wiggling his toes inside his shoe. As promised, his right foot was free. "I don't know much what to say, Jocus." Jocus then turned his attention back to Jay. "Jay, I don't know what's going on, but I think it's something we better keep to ourselves." Jay thought to himself that Jocus must have had something equivalent to a near-death experience for him to have such an immediately personality turn. Jay asked Jocus and Johnny both if they liked to join him and the other three to see where the adventure of this box would take them. They must honor the code of secrecy, and they must recognize that Leon is the portal through which communication with this box is conducted. They must also recognize that Jay is the leader, and Leon looks to him for approval prior to communicating with the box. Jocus and Johnny both agreed to the conditions required of them to join the group. They were especially agreeable if it meant getting completely unstuck from the ground. Jay looked at Leon. "Go ahead, Leon. Let their other feet loose now." With that, Leon gave the command. "Okay, box, let Jocus and Johnny's feet loose from the ground completely." With that, the box sent another flash of energy toward the boys. The ground around them buzzed and even glowed a little bit. All subsided. Even though they were now free to move at will, both Jocus and Johnny began what could only be called baby steps. They slid their feet across the dirt, lifting each foot slowly to reckon, its stability. From there, they progressed to a regular walking gait. The next stage was running, then came running with childlike abandon. When they started chasing each other and began weaving in and out around the original team of four, it became a problem. They were so happy to be free, they got careless. Their roughhousing was inflicting harm on one of the smaller members. Wayne was found lodging a complaint for having just been bounced to the ground. However unintentional, Wayne's sore bottom forced landing might have been, the roughhousing had to be stopped. "Hold up," said Jay. "Y'all gotta get a grip on your antics. Boys, you just can't go knocking people around, especially little ones like this one here." Johnny and Jocus got their first lesson in attitude adjustment. With one eye on Jay and the other on this box, both Jocus and Johnny offered an apology to Wayne. He accepted it begrudgingly as he brushed off the last puffs of clinging dust from his bottom. "Okay, team, let's huddle up and figure out our next move," said Jay. As they all gathered around, Jay spoke. "I think the first thing we need to do is go to this box and give Johnny and Jocus a chance to see up close what this box is all about. Anybody disagree with that?" Jay's suggestion carried unanimously, and following Jay's lead, the team started back up the hill toward the box. Jocus and Johnny found positions to the rear of the advancing single-file group. Jocus, being the least brave, let Johnny go ahead of him in line. On the way up the hill, they all noticed the ground, which had been violently disturbed earlier, no longer showed these signs of stress. Finally, reaching the box, the group looked at it in awe. Jocus remained as much as possible behind Johnny. Leon said, "It won't hurt you, Jocus. Come on over here by me, and I'll sort of introduce you to the box." Jocus reluctantly eased nearer to his younger brother. Why is it still up in the air? Asked Jokus. Good question, answered Leon. That's because I didn't tell it to go back to the ground, I suppose. I'll do that now. Okay by you, Jay? Jay said, hold off for a second while we decide what to do next. Then he spoke to Jokus. Jokus, did you or Johnny happen to see anybody down around Messamore's Pond? Jokus was reluctant to speak in front of the box, so he just shook his head and looked at Johnny. Johnny also responded with a nonverbal headshake. Okay, team, prepare to advance toward Messamore's Pond. Leon, go ahead and give the order for the box to follow you toward the pond, and for it to stop when you say so, said Jay. Leon looked at the box, with unnecessary effect grandly raised his hands over the box like a Reverend Dewberry would when he was going to baptize somebody. Leon spoke. Okay, box, I'm going down toward Messamore's Pond, and I need you to follow me until I say stop. He looked for Jay to confirmation of a job well done. Jay nodded. Leon continued with his hands raised and his wagon's westward hoe motion. He began the box to follow. With Leon at the front and the box close behind, the remaining team members got in line behind the box. That is, except for Jay, who was walking alongside the box where he could monitor its progress. He also had to watch Leon to be sure he navigated the whole entourage to the right pond. Leon followed a well-worn cattle trail to where anyone might expect the end to be a watering hole, or in this case, the pond. The box had apparently shared a bit of intelligence with Leon because he was right on track as far as Jay could tell. Wes, Wayne, Johnny, and Jokus stuck to the cow trail proper and kept up the pace behind the box, since they could not see around it. Jokus was still happy with his position at the rear. He was a believer in things supernatural, and the box certainly qualified as far as he was concerned. I see it, said Leon. Jay saw it too. Messamore's Pond was barely a half a mile from the house, but after all the things they had seen and done so far this day, it seemed a whole lot farther. As the pond became closer and closer, the four-pack at the rear of the box left the trail and gathered around Jay. Leon kept on walking. The others did too. All of them began to slow down some, and as Leon looked at Jay for guidance, he received it in the form of a nod. Okay, box, stop right there, said Leon. The box stopped. Jokus just shook his head in disbelief at seeing in action the power his little brother had been given. Tell it to land slowly to the ground, Leon, said Jay. Leon passed on the order, and the box complied by silently easing downward to its assigned resting place. Like most ponds, Messamore's Pond was created by water being held captive in a small valley. The water was retained by way of a tall dirt mound dam on the low end of the valley. The water depth on the dam end fluctuated between 5 and 8 feet, depending on the seasons. The other end was always shallow. The cattle stayed away from the deep end, so it was more attractive for human use. We'll store the box below the dam for tonight. We can start with a brand new day tomorrow, said Jay. Who brought the tools? Asked Jay. Wayne and Leon immediately pointed at Wes, whose eyebrows shot up so fast they almost left his forehead. Who, me? I ain't got no tools, said Wes. Wes, remember that blanket I gave you to take up before we left? Asked Jay. Wes rubbed his hand on his chin as though contemplating some deep, deep thought. All Wes could muster was, maybe. Well, where are they? I told you before we left to get a hammer, some nails, and a hatchet and a handsaw and wrap them in a blanket, said Jay. I did all that, and I laid the blanket down by the chicken house. You didn't tell me to bring them, said Wes. Okay, we need to do something quick before it gets dark. Wes, you and Wayne race back to the chicken house and get the tools and get some of those tarp scraps on the dog pen. We will start scouting a good spot to build a safe haven for the box. We will look for a good green stickwood to build with while you are gone. Now scoot." Wes took off to get the tools that he had laid aside by the chicken house, and as he ran, he heard the footfalls of Wayne, who was right on his tail. Since he left so quickly and deliberately, Wes had no memory of having to negotiate the barbed wire fence. He did have a bloody scratch on his right arm that he could only reckon came from that dang fence. Right now, haste was his main concern. He decided the best thing to do would be to ignore the scratch until such time later when he could register a more equitable whiny complaint in the presence of full assembled team. Wes was mentally patting himself on the back for his speed when the rolled up bunch of tools came into view right there by the chicken house. He looked over his left shoulder to see how far behind Wayne was. Wayne saw his chance to make a name for himself by beating Wes to the tools. Just as Wes looked left, Wayne passed him on the right. His little brother scooped up the tools and headed back toward the box. Over his shoulder, Wayne said, "You can get the tarp scraps and meet me back at the box, Wes." Wes had to switch from bragging on himself to tossing about some random but mild cuss words. Something like, "Gall ding flabbergibber mutter goober dilly rabbit." Loosely translated, it meant curses foiled again. Wes was in no hurry to gather up the requested tarp scraps, since it meant having another encounter with the old bad-natured dog, Buck. Wes sneaked over to the dog pen fence, which served a dual purpose of containing Buck and also providing a utility device on which to store loose scraps of tarp, big and small. Wes saw Buck sleeping in an area dug into the dirt underneath his doghouse. "Sweet dreams, you mean old dog," thought Wes. He wasted no time gathering up the scraps from the fence. He didn't know what they were to be used for. Jay didn't say. For that reason, he decided he would take as many scraps as he could carry and still be back to the box quick. With his arm near loaded to full capacity, he decided that one more would do it. Wes pulled on that last one as it slid off the fence. Bam! Buck was up on the fence with his front paws, and Wes, of course, was on the ground with all of his four paws in the air. It was a near miss for sure, but dang near enough to literally scare the pee out of Wes. He recovered quickly, though, stood up, gathered up his load of tarp scraps, and lumbered off to meet the team at Messamore's Pond. When Wes reached the barbed wire fence, he remembered his injury from before. He took a quick look at it, shook his head only to acknowledge it, and without further ceremony tossed his bundle of tarps over the fence, and he eased through the fence carefully and retrieved his load. Off he went down to the pond. When he got there, the others were already at work building some sort of shelter. "Aha," Wes said, "that's what these tarp pieces are for. They can be used to cover the shelter. Hey, Jay, I brought the tarps." "Okay, Wes, good job. Lay them out individually so we can choose by size as we need them," said Jay. Dutifully, Wes went about the task of doing so as Jay asked, "Hey, Wayne, how about you help Wes there while me and the others work on this shelter?" said Jay. Wayne begrudgingly laid down the saw he was wielding and ambled toward the pile of tarps that Wes had brought. He spied Wes's pants and started laughing. "Hey, what happened to your pants, Wes? Did you have an accident?" "No, I didn't have no accident." Thinking fast, for a quick answer was all Wes could come up with. "That dang dog spit on me." Well, that just made Wayne laugh even louder. "What's going on?" Jay barked. He didn't want anything to cause any more work stoppages since they were trying to finish before nightfall. Wayne repeated Wes's story to Jay. Jay quickly put it to rest by explaining there was no time to waste on it any further. "Let's get back to work and finish this job." Wes and Wayne finished their task of tarp spreading and moved over to where the serious construction had begun. Jocus had truly short legs, matched to an upper body that was otherwise fairly normal in proportion. It was those short legs that made him look not just plainly short, but strangely short. To add to his oddness, Jocus was gifted with huge feet. On tiptoes, he was as tall as anybody in the group. His big feet must have certainly have been attributed to his ability to run and jump. A local legend tells us that he once outran a bull in Messamor's pasture when he narrowly escaped being gored by leaping to safety across a big, wide ditch. Because of, and not in spite of, Joke's physique, he was perfectly suited for the task of cutting small saplings, cane poles, and such at a ground level. In the end, he was able to produce longer, more usable construction material. Now, Johnny, he had a knack for structural integrity. He could predict the best way to use the available materials. Johnny's talent was a valuable asset when critical construction techniques were needed. When it came time to make junctions with true right angles at the corners of the four-wall structure, Johnny's input was a requirement. Jay had outlined a plan for the overall structure, and Johnny applied his gift to best work the plan. For instance, Johnny knew instinctively to use the cane poles for roofing because they were both light and strong. Leon was not much involved in the manual labor. He was enjoying his position as interpreter-translator to the box. All he had to do was sit near the box and wait to be told something to do, whether it was the order coming from Jay or even possibly the box itself. As Leon watched the work progressing, he sat there on the ground, leaning back against the box. His legs crossed straight out in front of him. He got a little drowsy from the inactivity, and his eyes were trying to, with some success, close for the evening. Something caused the dozing Leon to ease open his eyes. Leon had on shoes, but that didn't stop his right big toe from peeping at him right through a big hole. He became hypnotized by the crooked toenail that seemed to not even be a part of his body. He opened both eyes enough to recognize that what he saw, in fact, was not part of his body. "Snake!" yelled Leon. "Blue Racer Snake!" He managed to yell it even louder. Feeling an instant rush of fear-factored adrenaline, Leon reacted with a single vertical leap that put him squarely on top of the box. All those present looked directly toward Leon when he yelled out "Snake," and can bear witness to Leon's leaping ability. All those present looked directly toward Leon when he yelled out "Snake," and can bear witness to Leon's leaping ability. They also saw what happened next. Leon remained on top of the box while the others moved carefully towards him, ever mindful of the presence of the evil and much hated boy-chasing snake called the Blue Racer. Jay thought to himself, maybe this was another case of a stick impersonating a snake. I mean, really, he thought, aren't snakes supposed to be hibernating in late December? Maybe the box disturbed the snake's slumber, bringing it out of its lair. They stopped suddenly in their tracks, not because of the snake, but because of the box. A rumble across the ground signaled that the box was initiating another event. Leon felt the vibration more than the others since he was standing on its source. Suddenly, standing didn't sound like a good idea, so he took a seat. The box began to rise up. It was a few feet off the ground when 3 laser-like lights beamed toward the ground in a rotating circular pattern. One beam circled the other in a progressively decreasing circumference. Finally, the 3 beams merged into one. At the end of the flashing burst, the light shot down and even made an audible report, something like "floop." Even as the smoke and the smell of the fried snake began to emanate from the charred spot in the grass, the box was descending back to its original resting place on the ground. A noticeably shaken Leon cautiously left his position of safety.
"What the flargin' storky moogan wampus you doin', Leon?" asked Jokus. "You trying to scare the muggy slappin' flickle out of me? You know I hate snakes."
Jokus was not prone to using a lot of words available in the English language. He was more comfortable pulling from his stock of family favorite curse words. We will leave those verbal, mostly one-word embellishments to your imagination.
Jocus was not only short in stature, but he was also a tad short-sighted when it came to awareness of those around him. It never occurred to him that others present may have experienced the same level of fear, dread, and concern as he did. "Jocus, wake up, guy," Jay admonished. "You're not the only one who saw what happened." "Huh?" said the monosyllabic Jocus. "What are you talking about?" "We all saw that snake, and we all saw what the box did to protect Leon. Now let's get back to work." Jocus relented and came dangerously close to apologizing to his younger brother when he said, "Good shot, Leon." Leon smiled appropriately. The time had come to take stock of the day's accomplishments. The box had been moved. It had been placed in a semi-protective location. It had been concealed under a structure built to professional standards as far as teen and pre-teenage boys could manage. They stood back to admire what they had done. Jay was first to speak. "It's beautiful," said Jay. "Now all we need to do is wait till we can work on what's inside some more." Jay called an impromptu meeting before everyone was excused to go their separate ways. In the huddle that formed around the box, there were 3 Pools, 2 Warrens, and 1 Baker. Jay started the meeting by saying, "Listen, fellers, I don't know when we'll be able to get back to investigate what's inside the box, but I think it depends more on the box than on us when that happens." Leon was displaying a look that the lights were on but nobody's home as he looked at Jay. "What I mean is," says Jay, "it doesn't seem like we are in control of anything related to this here box. The box does what we say only when it agrees with our actions." Leon's facial expression changed only slightly towards some level of awareness. Jay continues the meeting. "What we need to do is return to our homes and wait." That last part was met with sharp disapproval from all the others that were present. "No," chimed Wes and Wayne in unison. "Nuh-uh, no way," spoke Jonas, and Johnny gave a verbal sign by way of nod and an index finger aimed at Jocus. "Leon, what do you think?" said Jay. Leon cupped his hand under his chin as if he was in deep thought. He raised his head to look at Jay, but Leon knew he was supposed to answer him, but didn't know what to say. Then suddenly, Leon shivered. It was getting a little chilly outside, but not so much to warrant an almost violent, uncontrolled shimmy shake that Leon was now exhibiting. As if possessed, he spoke in a gravely monotone voice. "The box says come back on Christmas Eve. The box says to stay away till Christmas Eve. All will know when to come." Each of the boys stared at Leon, afraid to look away as he spoke those words that had obviously come straight from the box. Leon sat on the ground near the box to rest. His energy was spent. With that, the others looked one to the other and silently confirmed that they all understood the message. They were to go home, but not come back until Christmas Eve. It was up to each of them how they managed their time for the next 6 days. As far as the Pool boys were concerned, there was always extra company around at Christmas time, and this year would be no different. Jay worried unnecessarily about the non-Pool portion of the box group and whether they would be able to stay away from the box per its instructions. He need not to have worried, though, because Leon was as good as any current crime drama confidential informant. According to the C.I. Leon, Jocus did in fact try to approach the box once, but only once. He merely laid one hand on the box, and his curiosity was rewarded with a painful electric shock that sent him straight to the ground. With his feet in contact with nothing but air and his shoulders stuck on the ground, he continued to rotate like a helicopter until he had a sizable circular depression in the landing spot. It didn't take long for him to run out of gas and come to rest. Leon said he witnessed it all from a position a safe distance away and, more importantly, out of his vengeful brother's line of sight. Jocus learned his lesson, which was this: when the box speaks, you listen. The Sleigh. Christmas Eve, December 24th, 1945, arrives. The group, except for one minor transgression by Jocus, had dutifully waited as directed by the box until Christmas Eve arrived. The next move must be considered carefully. The Pool boys decided it was time to visit the site of the box. Once that decision was made, a respectful, if not sneaky, way to exit from the family's annual gathering was required. Being Christmas Eve, surely no one would suspect chicanery if they all chose to voluntarily go to bed early. Yawns, both real and affected, swept over the boys as they marched off to bed with military-like precision. Once in the bedroom, a well-practiced drill came into play. The boys exited quickly, one by one, through the screenless window next to Jay and Wes's bed. In reverse chronological order, the bare feet of Jay, Wes, and Wayne hit the now lightly snow-covered ground below. An immediate reaction to the cold caused a yelp or two, which was soon shushed by Jay as a reminder that they were supposed to be sneaking out, with the emphasis on sneaking. Jay poked his head back in the window and asked Richard to toss out their shoes and coats. Jay momentarily considered this error in the execution of the aforementioned drill. He made a mental note that next time they would put on their shoes and coats before going out of the window. Shoes were first to be put on, then the coats. Now, ready for the trip to Messamore's Pond, they made their way to the crate. As they arrived at the site, they were surprised to be joined by all the other players. It was as if simultaneously, if not spontaneous, wave of interest came over the entire group. Without acknowledging each other's reason for being there, they simply walked in silence the rest of the way to the box. Once there, they gathered in a circle around it. Leon stepped forward and tentatively laid his hands on top of the box. Remembering what happened to Jocus, he was a little skeptical. Suddenly, Leon spoke. "Get back! Get back!" he yelled. "It's happening!" With more than a little trembling in his voice, Jay said, What is happening, Leon? What's happening?" "The thing's coming out," Leon managed to sputter. "Retreat! Retreat!" yelled Jay. "Get back up the hill!" No further instruction was required before the entire group began to run, slipping and sliding and flipping and flopping on top of one another to put a safe distance between them and the box. Having then reached what they considered a safe distance away, they stood in a tight group, all of them focused on the box now down below them. Leon had, of course, counted himself among those now on the hill, and he watched anxiously with the others to see what would come next. Dark had set in already, so everything that transpired after that would be a sight to behold, even if they were not able to tell anybody. The box had, days before, seemingly on its own, burned away the materials fashioned by the boys. Their attempt to disguise the actual presence of the box with sticks, old tarp rags, mud, muck, was replaced by a covering of gleaming, welded, and riveted steel. Even the most curious wanderer would never be able to penetrate the cover, nor be able to move the object to a different location. A light show for the boys was about to commence. Suddenly, lightning-like fire outlined every edge of the box. To the untrained eye, the box appeared to be only a wire frame. Impressive, since it was made of lightning and fire. Apparently, the wire-framed experience was just the first step before the reappearance of the wooden box inside. Next came the rivets. As if they were choreographed by a great designer, Each one turned into a flaming white-hot missile that ejected outward and upward and unto the sky. The group, it should be noted, was grateful that any of the rivets that shot out in their direction turned and went straight up into the night. Shoom, shoom, shoom. One rivet after another shot skyward, leaving a flaming trail in its wake. The boys were awestruck. All of them were brought to the point of silent wonder as the light showed that they had just witnessed. As the last of the rivets faded in the night sky, the box continued to rumble and quake. What appeared earlier to be a wire frame was in fact the welded edges of the box, which added another level of security against the unnecessarily curious. The panels, just like the rivets before, radiated more light and a fiery substance outward and upward. Just as before with the rivets, the light was directed safely away from the boys, who grouped together even more tightly as the process continued to unfold. As the edge of each panel shot out its part of the fire and light display, a rainbow of colors filled the entire night sky. The silence was finally broken with a chorus of oohs and ahs from the group. One after another, each panel lit up, spewed forth its sparks and light, broke the bond of the weld that held it in place, and fell to the ground. Finally, there was just an old familiar box left there on the ground. Jay broke from the group and took a step toward the box and said, "Come on, let's go see what we can see." The others followed meekly behind him. As they got near the box, there appeared to be no evidence of anything they had just witnessed. No rivets, no panels, no scorched earth. What did they see? Leon touched the box and quickly pulled his hand away. "It ain't even warm. Fact is, it felt cold like you'd expect," said Leon. He then said something that put a bit of scare into the others. He said something was leading him to put his hand back on the box, and that's what he did. He further said the box indicated that there was not much time left, and Leon didn't know what that meant. Jay said, "You know, I think I know what that means. It is Christmas Eve. Where does a sleigh belong on Christmas Eve?" He looked at each other, at all the boys, and of the blank faces that surrounded him. "The North Pole, you ninnies. It belongs at the North Pole." Their collective blank look changed immediately at their sudden grasp of a complicated situation. Jay continued, "Leon, keep your hand on that box and tell it that it's safe to open on up now." Leon did as he was told. With continued trust in Leon, the box responded to Leon's request to open up. The front wooden panel of the box fell away. As soon as it hit the ground, the panel pillared into a column of smoke and disappeared. One by one, each panel fell and produced the same smoky disappearing act as the ones before it. All except for the top panel, which Leon was still attached to it. With his hand still on the panel, Leon turned to the group, and all eyes were on Leon. Guided by forces which none of those present had any knowledge, Leon began to raise his hand. To his astonishment, the top panel came up with his hand. It was as though it was glued to the panel. The panel, which should have been way too heavy to lift, seemed to weigh nothing. As he brought his hand upward, the panel turned to smoke and disappeared to join the others. Now, all the panels were gone. What was left was the amazing object that was suspended in its own magnetic field in what had been in the center of the box. Reminiscent of a nativity scene, the group found themselves standing in a semicircle as they gazed in awestruck wonder at the sight before them. The pool boys looked at each other, remembering their first similar encounter with the sleigh. "Jay is right. The next stop is the North Pole on this night of nights," Someone said. Who said it? Is it possible it was the object talking? In some miracle of silent speech, the group all looked at each other individually and came to the unanimous conclusion that it was time to let go. The tiny sleigh must be free to go now that it had survived the war and the tyranny that came with it. The war was over, so the box was free to return to its rightful place. The group had served its purpose by providing protection for the sleigh until its time to go had come. That time having arrived, the boys quickly said their goodbyes. None of them tried to use their newly attained influence to gain favor from the big guy once the sleigh was returned. Leon, said Jay, I would say ask the box, but the box is gone, so I guess you can say, Sleigh, what do we do next? Leon pondered Jay's statement for a bit, and although he didn't know what a conundrum was, the issue before Leon was in fact a conundrum, and it pained him mentally to have to consider it. But consider it he did. Leon moved a little closer to the object and said something the others could not hear or just could not understand. To the surprise of all those present, Leon was speaking to the sleigh in German. Until moments ago, he was unaware that he could read German, let alone speak it. The others thought they heard him repeat what was printed on the label when they first saw and found the box. In the big block letters, it had said, Offen Sie bis Weihnachten 1941 nicht. And as established earlier in this story, the German words translated to do not open until Christmas 1941. Amazingly, though, Leon went beyond what was on the label. He continued to converse with the object in its apparent native language. Leon said, Hot Abend ist Heiligabend der Weihnachtmann kommt. In English, that means, tonight is Christmas Eve, and Santa Claus is coming. The object continued to converse with Leon, to which Leon responded by nodding or grunting in a positive manner to whatever was coming from the object. Leon finally stepped back as if some sort of spell had just been removed for him. He shuddered visibly and shook his head rapidly from side to side. He looked like an old hound dog flopping his ears and lips after a long snooze face down in the dirt. He turned toward the group. Leon spoke briefly and concisely, which was far removed from his usual limited command of oratory. First off, the sleigh must go immediately. Secondly, the sleigh expresses its fondness of those who retrieved it from the wet, muddy bog that might eventually had consumed it. The sleigh also wants to thank all those who worked to keep it safe, secure, and secreted from public scrutiny. Lastly, the sleigh asks that you turn away from it and assume the duck and cover position before it exits. The sleigh says, while this may be a new term for you now, it will come up again in later years during what will become known as the Atomic Age. Dutifully, they all complied. Facing away from the sleigh, they all knelt to their knees, bent over, and placed their faces in their hands on the ground. Determined not to look, they listened intently to the great rumblings and sounds of huge amounts of energy being released. For fear of blindness, they squeezed their eyes as tightly closed as possible. The light became brighter and brighter and brighter in the full darkness of Christmas Eve. Finally, the light began to decrease as the sleigh was assumed to be well on its way to the North Pole. They were suddenly all kind of sleepy. Without protest, they each went their own way towards home. That is where they would find warmth and love of family, which sounded like the right place to be this particular night. The brothers, Jay, Wes, and Wayne, returned to the same window by which they had exited. In a whisper, Jay spoke to Richard and Lyndon through the broken window pane. Hey, wake up, Lyndon. Open the window so we can sneak back in. Don't wake Daddy up. He might not think kindly to our being gone. Wake up, Lyndon. Can't you hear me? Wake up. I rubbed my eyes, trying to wake up, when I heard the voice. But I wasn't sure where it was coming from. I raised up and looked around and immediately recognized that I wasn't even at home. I was in church. It was a Christmas Eve service. I was vaguely aware that there was a lot of talk about sleigh bells and sleighs and Santa Claus before I drifted off to sleep. Mama rubbed my head and said, "Are you awake now, Lyndon?" I responded with, "Yes, Mama, I'm awake. Boy, you'll never believe the dream I just had." I didn't have time to tell the whole dream just then, beyond the fact that I dreamed about a tiny sleigh and my older brothers had a part in setting it free. I allowed as how the details would come later. Church was over, and that meant one thing. With an air of urgency, the pool boys couldn't be restrained any longer. They knew that Daddy had left the church service early. They were sure that meant there would be presents under the tree when they got home. As soon as the final prayer was finished, they would be out the door, just seconds now till go time. The preacher asked for a volunteer to pray. Halford Hallowell raised his hand. "Oh, no," said Jay. "He always says the longest prayers ever uttered in the First Baptist Church in Wilton, Arkansas." Sure enough, Mr. Hallowell was off and running. With heads bowed and eyes closed, the boys reverently, or at least quietly, inched their way toward the big double doors at the rear of the church. As soon as they heard amen, they would be out the door and heading home. On and on the prayer continued. They were going nuts as Mr. Hallowell paused and drew a big breath and started off again. "No," said Wes. "He's off and running again." Finally, Mr. Hallowell almost shouted, "Amen." With that, the boys executed a not-so-elegant exit from the joyous Christmas proceedings. Bursting out the exit doors of the church, Jay, Wes, and Wayne became a mass of flailing knees and elbows not unlike a sadly wound ball of barbed wire and calf rope. Today, toward home they marched, looking at the meager decorations of the individuals' homes only slightly as they passed. They reached Mill's store windows. From there, home was almost visible across the railroad tracks. Jay was first to see it. Wes and Wayne had been following single file, and they stacked up behind Jay. They looked in the store window and became transfixed. There, amid the display, placed on a red velvet blanket, was a tiny, shiny, perfectly formed little bitty sleigh. "Was that there when we went to church?" asked Jay. "I didn't see it." Wayne nodded in agreement. As they started to walk on by, Jay said, Look, there's a little sign down there next to it. What does it say?" "Good grief," Wes said. "It says Made in Germany."